Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. It is an early Monday morning, but we're here together, and I am glad that we could be here together on this Monday morning. There have been disastrous events to take place over the weekend. Yesterday, I did a video, and in the video, I pointed out that we need to be very careful about the time period between Joe Biden leaving office as a lame duck and Donald Trump taking office as president of the United States. And my reasoning boiled down to the idea that Joe Biden fully knows that from his point of view and from what Donald Trump has basically claimed as his main platform, meaning I'm going to end the war, that this $200 billion grift may be coming to an end. And coming to an end in a way that is utterly and entirely humiliating for one Joe Biden, considering Joe Biden is the one that got us that involved in that conflict. That is Joe Biden's war. And so what would Joe Biden and the European vassals who are also in political trouble do on their way out? And would they try to create a situation to escalate the war before Trump gets in? I end that video, and by the time I close the video and open up my Twitter account, there you have it. Joe Biden decides that he will allow strikes into Russian territory. Now, Putin has said early on, very clearly, and part of the reason that the Biden administration wouldn't do this prior was because Putin said, we will be at war with NATO if you do that. That this is you're effectively initiating a war. This was right here. Russia will be, quote, at war, unquote, with NATO if Ukraine long-range missiles restrictions are lifted, Putin warns. He was very clear. It was unequivocal. This is a red line for us. And his reasoning was pretty straightforward. Ukraine has already been firing missiles or, let's say, drones and those sort of things into Russia proper. That has been happening. The difference is if you're going to use ATACAMS or some of the other missile systems, it literally requires the United States to program those missiles, which means it is the US, or for that matter, NATO countries that are firing those missiles into Russia, not Ukraine doing it. His point is, if you think we're going to sit back and allow NATO to fire missiles into Moscow or Russia, you are out of your mind. And yet, up to this point, it seems that the Pentagon had Joe Biden's ear on this because the Pentagon warned Joe Biden about doing it. Fast forward to losing the election. Now, that's the mind-blowing part. You lost. Your orthodoxy on this war failed to the American public. And when you ask the American public, who do you trust more so on foreign policy, it goes to Trump. Now, I'm not saying Donald Trump is a peacenik. I've never made that argument. What I have said was Donald Trump was more open to negotiations, whereas Democrats, negotiations were always off the table. And the fact that Donald Trump ran this entire race saying, I'm going to end the war, I'm going to end the war. You can imagine that the framing of the people who are in Washington, or for that matter in Europe, or for that matter, the American public that heard that and voted for him, in part because of that, will look at this as A, sour grapes, and B, an escalation that can bring us to the brink of a nuclear war. We need to be very clear what Joe Biden just did here. We are whistling past the graveyard. If any of those missiles are fired and hit somewhere of significance, all hell will break loose. And Russia has already pointed out, we will hit immediately. And we won't just hit Ukraine. All of your bases abroad are targets, meaning you are fair game from here on out under this model to which you are operating. Understand they came up with the most ridiculous logic in order to make this work. For the longest time, they've been talking about North Korean troops. Oh, North Korean troops, North Korean troops. North Korean troops all over. Russia's bringing in North Korean troops to fight the Ukrainians. Now, Just think about it just for a split second. Ukraine was the one that was out of manpower. Ukraine was the one that couldn't get enough weapons, missiles, bullets, guns, artillery fire, aircraft cover. They were the ones that didn't have enough drones. And again, I want to go back to the manpower thing because if you remember, Ukraine was the one that was talking about at that point pulling in kids. And by kids, I'm talking about 20 something year olds. The majority of the people, or the average age of the people fighting on the Ukrainian fronts, are in their 40s. They're my age. Imagine me dragging a gun and eating a potato, waiting for the Russians to end my life. They are literally snatching people off of dance floors in order to throw them into a truck, to throw them on the front line where they will be killed within 48 hours or a week. It's not Russia with manpower issues. Russia at this point is producing more weapons and armaments than all of NATO combined. And from the standpoint of manpower, they've had a healthy number of people sign up and register to the point where they're nearly at 1 million men military. Now, the reason they're nearly at 1 million men military is because what the Russian Federation, meaning the country itself, knows is that this is a war with NATO. And this is not happening on the border of Texas. This is happening on the border of Russia. And I guess that's my other point. This argument that the North Koreans are involved, and because the North Koreans are involved in the war, that now we can escalate further and allow Ukraine strikes into Russia. For one, they have not nailed down or validated the North Korean thing at all. The newspapers are reporting that like that is a flat fact. You will need to show me that because it doesn't exist. You may see a person who looks Asian somewhere, but that's not evidence that the North Koreans are out there on the front lines fighting a battle. It's ludicrous. And yet, mainstream media, the same media that said Russia blew up its own pipelines, that talked about the ghost of Kiev, that talked about Russia bombing its own nuclear facilities, that same media is now reporting that the North Koreans, despite not having a shred of evidence to attest to it, are fighting on the front lines, which is why Ukraine is having such a difficult time. It's outrageous. Even if it was true, so what? You have invested billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into attacking Russia, for one, trying to destroy the military, for two, trying to destroy the economy, for three. You have used all of the forces of your NATO allies in order to accomplish this particular task. All of it has utterly and completely failed. Russia has an agreement and security arrangements with North Korea. They are most likely going to get artillery and weapons from North Korea. Now, if North Korea wants to send troops in order to, train, that is different than those troops being on the front line fighting Ukrainians. Those are very different things. And to be honest, I haven't even seen that, but they have taken it even from that potential to North Koreans are fighting Ukrainians. And so now we can just, blow off what the Pentagon has said. We can ignore what Putin has said, that this is a red line and that this is going to have consequences all across the world for US, or for that matter, NATO troops, because they're in bases all across the world. And as Putin said, those bases are fair game. Hey, Houthis, want a hypersonic missile? Hey, Hezbollah, do you need a missile or two to help you out in your task? Hey, random group in Syria or in the Middle East, you want to take a shot at the US base? Here you go. The Pentagon was against it because from their point of view, you got nothing out of it in comparison to what you lose. What you lose is security for Americans all across the world, or for that matter, the West. What you lose is a potential for a large exchange between nuclear powers. Because again, you are allowing a country that is fundamentally busted and desperate, ran by a grifter who knows he has lost, and not just knows he has lost, is at this point made it very clear that he wants to get the other powers involved in the conflict. which means you've given somebody who's very desperate the means by which to create a uncontrolled escalation with us, the US, being involved potentially because of it. I have said Joe Biden was the worst president we've ever had, and I stand by that. And I would even go so far as to say that this level of incompetence, this level of recklessness, is part and part to the reason that they lost. And it makes me think it was a good thing that they lost if Joe Biden would be willing to do some insane shit like this. You lost, bro. And not just you lost on this issue of whether or not the American public thought your policy was better on foreign policy than Trump's. And considering Kamala Harris had the exact same foreign policy, that was your policy on the line that took the L. And yet here we are. This war is so senseless. And the reason I've been so adamant about putting an end to this war is because it's so senseless. That with immense degree, we under no circumstances would ever accept the premise that Russia or aligned countries with Russia knock over the government of Mexico in a coup, and a violent coup, no less, then start putting in intelligence officials, military, bullets, guns, missiles, drones, etc., aimed at the United States, with a massive military being built up, with part of the American population of Mexico being put under some kind of, political stress. You can't speak English from here on out. You can't use English school books from here on out. Those political parties that are favorable to America, no. Those political parties are no longer allowed. And yeah, the regions that decided to break away because, we overthrew the legitimate democratically elected government, those regions, we're now attacking those regions. Do you honestly believe America would accept that premise? Oh, Mexico is an independent nation. It can put in weapons and bullets and guns and intelligence officials. It can do all of that stuff and it can aim it at us. They're independent. We know from the Cuban Missile Crisis that the U.S. would lose its mind. And the reason I'm pointing that example out is to show how ludicrous the U.S. position is and has been all the way through on this issue. We expanded NATO to the borders of Russia with the goal of trying to surround the country to the degree that we could surround it. We did not like the fact that Yanukovych was at the very least friendly to Russia, and we call that friendliness effectively that he was a Russian plant. And so when the situation availed itself and Victoria Nuland was perfectly able to overthrow the government of Ukraine with the help of Banderite Nazis, for all intents and purposes, not to mention special services from our side, then we called it a revolution of dignity, as opposed to calling it what it actually was, which was a violent coup. Elements broke away after that coup, at which point the Ukrainian government went on a killing spree, killing 14,000 ethnic Russian Ukrainians who decided that they didn't want to be part of the coup government because the real legitimate government had fallen apart. I'm giving this history on this to show how ludicrous all of this is. There were Minsk agreements 1 and 2, agreements that were agreed upon by all of the European leaders, including the United States, and it was supposed to put an end to the conflict. And instead of putting an end to the conflict, Angela Merkel said the quiet part out loud, that this was done purely to lie to Putin, to give time in order to give space for Ukraine to build up a massive military. So a deal that was supposed to end a conflict ended up being a provocation for the conflict that the deal was ultimately supposed to end. All of this propaganda of unprovoked is nonsense. It was obviously provoked. Russia wasn't expanding to the border of Texas. No, NATO, a violent military organization, was expanding on the border and around the border of Russia with this idea of creating a Hobbes choice. Either you allow us to knock over this government, you allow us to militarily occupy Crimea, you allow us to basically have a huge military presence on your border, or You take military actions in order to resolve it. No country would allow it, and Russia's military action to resolve it. I am joined with Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst, and easily one of my favorite people to talk to, and somebody that I deeply appreciate for giving me the time of day. Mark, how you doing this morning, man? You doing all right? Well, morning for me, evening for you. How you doing today?
Jamarl, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Mark, it's always an honor and a pleasure to have you. I don't have you for long today because we have to end at 7:30, but I definitely wanted to get you on, and I thank you for joining me. The allowance, Joe Biden is whistling past the graveyard and has allowed long-range strikes into Russia. Now, as I sent you the message, this concerns me greatly because A, he's a lame duck president. B, I'm not even entirely sure of his motivation for doing it, and I want to get your take on that. But what is the conversation in Russia right now? Putin has said this was a red line. Do you believe he's going to stand by the red line comment? And what does it mean in real terms about it being a red line? Give me your thoughts.
Okay, so Putin has definitely made clear before that the U.S. conducting long-range missile strikes into Russian territory, at least Russia pre 2014 Russia, because, of course, the longer-range ATACAMS ballistic missiles have already been used on targets in Crimea, in the Donbass, and, I think it's fair to say that Russia has already demonstrated significant capability to bring down these weapons with air defense and electronic warfare, such that Western media reports have noted that the weapons are effective less than 10% of the time. So, as to how Russia will respond, right? Previously, Russia has said that they would consider this essentially an act of war, right? Because Putin has gone into great detail describing how that these missiles have to be operated by U.S. troops, right? The satellite data for the targeting, right? It's got a range of around 190 miles, around 300 kilometers. They have to be fired from one of the Kiev regime's existing HIMARS or M270 systems. The satellite data has to be inputted, and the missiles have to be programmed for the flight sequence, and that has proprietary software data that simply there's no way that the U.S. would transfer that to the Kiev regime side. So there are U.S. military specialists on the ground operating these weapons, and we know this because the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said as much. He said exactly that. And he was speaking more specifically of the British Storm Shadows and Scalps, but he also made reference to the U.S. systems and German generals plotting to blow up the Crimean Bridge with Taurus cruise missiles, the audio of which was linked, noted the same thing and talked about maybe we could get some of those American those people with American accents on the ground to fire our systems as well. That was the oblique way they talked about it. So because this is an American weapon fired by Americans using American intelligence deep into Russia, that the Russian government would consider this an act of war. They would reserve the right to strike directly against U.S. targets. But he also went on to basically make clear that they would more probably do some sort of attack through a third party, through a proxy, right? A thinly veiled proxy, much like the Kiev regime forces in Ukraine. And previously, CNN and other Western media have reported on how Russia was last autumn, earlier this autumn, was about to launch, was about to provide the Houthis in Yemen with long-range anti-ship missiles capable of bringing down U.S. carriers and military ships, and that the Biden administration apparently at the time talked them back, presumably by agreeing not to going ahead with the long-range strike that they're going to now. So if that story is true, then it is very likely that we could see the Houthis armed with longer range, more effective anti-ship missiles, and almost certainly having the satellite data needed to more accurately target them as well. So that is probably the most obvious. Now, there is a question of whether Russia will respond to this, despite a red line being crossed. And there's a couple of reasons for this.
Yeah.
First and foremost is this is an obvious attempt by, as you said, a lame duck president to further involve the U.S. Into the conflict, to make it harder for the president-elect Donald Trump to enact any type of quote-unquote deal or peace plan or even de-escalation, whatever you have it. He wants to get the U.S. as involved in as he can. The second point, so that may change, right? When Trump assumes office, he hasn't given any signals yet, but he could theoretically revoke this, right? Quite easily, and that this would be a very temporary measure. So he has reason to not want to escalate, you could argue, right on the eve of Trump's election, depending on what the Russian goals are. Maybe they don't care. They've already seemed to indicate that they don't believe that a new president will mean any change in U.S. policy in Ukraine. They've been very explicit in saying that. But the other reason is because the New York Times, while they're speaking to anonymous officials, and none of this is confirmed, they went on further to suggest that these strikes, at least in the beginning, could be restricted to a narrow range of territory in the Kursk region, supposedly the Kursk region of Russia, supposedly where the North Korean troops are, the invisible North Korean special forces super soldiers that no one has actually seen or provided any evidence of yet, except for the ghost of Kiev. Evidently, the ghost of Kiev has been involved in fierce battles. And the ghosts of the Snake Island martyrs. They've been. So, I mean, this is the justification that is being put forward in the media for these attacks about the North Koreans, right? That
well, now we know why they brought them up. I mean, because I was like, okay, what is with this North Korean thing? Why do they keep bringing this up now?
Well, this is exactly why Zelensky, I believe, created this fiction until presented with any evidence. As far as I'm concerned, it's fan fiction. But that is to get exactly the steps like this that they had been pushing for, that NATO had denied them. So you see what he's doing by providing a narrow range of targets just in one Russian region. He's very, very thinly attempting to slice the salami. And this is what the U.S. has done this entire conflict, and even before Russia intervened, for years, right? This is a standard U.S. tactic to escalate in very, very small degrees, such that when you do it, the other side is left with, well, do we escalate into steps that could lead to further escalation or could take us into direct conflict over just this small thing? And that's what they're attempting to do here. Does Putin strike the U.S. or strike a U.S. military base or provide anti-ship missiles to Houthis to strike a U.S. warship because they allowed for strikes just in a small region of Kursk, right? That is an argument, right? One side will say that it doesn't matter how thin the salami is sliced. You're slicing the salami. We recognize what you're doing, and we have to deter you from making any further escalation. And the other side of that is, especially with Trump coming in, it's simply not worth it. We can already bring down these ATACAMS 7 times out of 10 or 9 times out of 10 anyway. And so that argument will be, is raging. I'm almost certain in the Kremlin, or has
So
been.
wait, real quick, is that what you think is going on then? The thought is, okay, we need to provoke the Russians in order to get them more ingratiated with it, basically to give ourselves a reason to go further into the conflict where Trump.
I think part of the reason that Biden, so for Biden's motivation, there's a couple of reasons. One is simply hatred and spite for both Putin and Trump, whom the man obviously hates both, right? Yeah. The Pentagon has already been clear. They're against this, right? They think that this will result in no significant military effects for Ukraine, right? For the Kiev regime. It will not change anything on the battlefield. They've made clear that the targets, the airfields that the Kiev regime supposedly wants to hit are well out of range. Russia's operating their aircraft well out of range of the ATACAMS, and that this would be a needless escalation for minuscule military benefit. So this is not a military decision. This is a political decision. Another possible motivation is the fact that Biden is concerned about, at least what is in his mind, his legacy. He doesn't want to leave the field with the argument hanging out there. Oh, we could have won this war if only Biden had done this. And this is one of the last things that he hasn't done. So he's got some reason in terms of a legacy for providing it out the door. Also, in doing it, I believe in the way that he's doing, he thinks that he can do it, particularly knowing that Putin knows that Trump is coming into office in 2 months, and avoid any Russian response. Yeah. Right. So the opposite, I would, of what you suggested there. They think they can do this here and now and get no response because they're slicing it so thinly. And when they're slicing it, just before they exit the stage, and Russia's got to seriously weigh all of those things, what its own intelligence about the incoming elect Trump's decision-making processes and all this. Yeah. We've already seen at least a post by Elon Musk seeming to condemn this on Twitter. Too. Yeah. And Donald Trump Jr. Not that they evidently have that much say, because it wasn't long ago that Donald Trump Jr. was saying we have to prevent any neocons from coming into the administration at all. And it's like 95% neocons, right? So Donald Trump Jr. may not have all that much say over what his daddy's doing. Just saying. Yeah. It's a lot hanging out there right now. And it must be said that the timing is, I believe that this decision, this isn't something that happened in the last 48 hours, right? It's been coming before. But perhaps, whichever came first, Russia has also launched 2 significant escalations in the last week. The first one is they have begun a whole new offensive front in the south, in Zaporozhye, pushing north from Roboltina and also in the area of the Vremovsky salient. So that is, going well past, where the Kiev regime launched their failed 2023 summer offensive from. So that's a whole new front that the Kiev regime is going to have. They already have the manpower woes. They can't handle another front. There's no question. Also, Russia has sent at least, we don't know how big, there is some suspicion that it's just DRG, diversion and reconnaissance groups, but in the north has sent troops into the Chernigov region of Ukraine from the Bryansk region of Russia, which has not seen significant military developments, at least since the beginning of the first few months of the conflict. And according to reports, Russia has taken a couple of villages there on the ground. So that is the potential for another direction headed in.
Wow.
Now, also on top of that, overnight, Russia launched huge missile and drone strikes on Ukraine, perhaps the biggest of the war thus far. According to the Kiev regime, we don't have the Russian official take yet, but according to the Kiev regime, at least 120 missiles and 90 drones. And the drones was the entire gambit of Russian missiles, right? From ballistic missiles like the Iskander to sea-launched cruise missiles like the Caliber, to the hypersonic missiles like the Zircon and the Kinjal, also the KH-101 and others, right? And the primary target was indeed, as has long been suspected, the Kiev regime's electrical infrastructure. So the dark winter scenario is obviously a thing. The Russian government is going to shut the lights, the power, the heat, the water off in Ukraine over the winter months. Which definitely should be seen as an escalation. The potential there, of course, is to drive the Kiev regime's logistics and its military industrial complex, such as it is in underground workshops, down to nothing, but also to, of course, have an effect on the civilian population and potentially drive millions of more refugees into Europe. So that's a big scenario too. So we're seeing escalations on both sides right here on the eve of the new president of the change of power in the United States, and the Kiev regime forces still just continue crumbling, particularly in the Donbass, in the south central Donbass area. They're barely able to slow Russian forces down at this point. And now these new offensives in other places.
Well, Mark, man, I always appreciate your take on this stuff. I when this first happened, my thought was, oh my God, what the hell is Joe Biden doing? And I couldn't tell whether it was, okay, this is him trying to provoke, or if it was the other way, that, it's like, okay, well, if Russia can knock these down, is it, for posterity?
I think it's a sneak parting shot.
Yeah, I agree with you. It seems to be more of spite than anything else. Mark, man, always appreciate you, Mark. I'm sorry I couldn't get you longer for today, but always appreciate you. You're always so informative. Mark Sleboda, he's an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSleboda1 and on his YouTube channel, A Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. Check out Mark's channel. He knows his stuff. Man, thank you for this. The audience have even pointed out, they said Mark has been right about this all the way through. He's like, yeah, he has. So keep it up, Mark.
I wish I wasn't, and I hope I'm wrong.
On some of the stuff, I hope you're wrong too, because this is going to be worse before it gets better. But we'll see. We'll be here together. Have a good one, man. Thank you. All right, let's bring in our next guest, Laith Maroof. Man, I'm sorry for the wait. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing this morning? Well, it's not morning for you, but how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you very much. It was good actually to hear some of Mark's comments before getting on the show.
Oh man, he knows the stuff. And Mark has been kind of our point person to explain this stuff going all the way back to the last several years. And his accuracy has been far better than many other people that you would ever find on mainstream media or something like that. So it's a fortune to have him. And I'm just as fortunate to have you. So I thank you for it. Laith Maroof. He is an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues in the liberation and decolonization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented, underrepresented communities around the world. Laith, man, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
With you.
Donald Trump has been bringing people into his administration. And there's been two people that I like, Gabbard and RFK Jr. I appreciate their positions. The rest of the people seem to be lunatics to me. And he seems to be pushing an Israel first policy. And I always say people of policy, these are the people that he's putting in his positions. Um, but the world is not the same world that he left. When Donald Trump initially was in office, he was going with the Abraham Accords. He effectively ignored the Palestinians. The Saudis were still out to get the Iranians. Like, that was the world that he left. And so he had this pressure campaign against Iran during that time period. Okay, fast forward. Saudi Arabia and Iran has made amends. Israel has pissed off every actor in that region. I would go so far as to say even the world. And at this point, the main exporter for oil, or the place where the oil goes from Iran, is China, to the tune of something like 90%. So he is coming in with seemingly a pressure strategy in a world that is fundamentally different than the world that he left. From your point of view, what does this look like? If he comes in and he goes with his Israel first strategy, basically Netanyahu said he wants to cut the head off the state, meaning Iran, so he gets Trump to put pressure on Iran. What does that look like now that Saudi Arabia is probably not on board? The rest of the Middle Eastern countries, short of Jordan, may not be on board. China is not going to be okay with its oil revenue or its oil being cut. So that's off the table. And even if he wants to make some kind of agreement with Russia, if you are pissing off the other members of BRICS, I don't know how that deal with Russia is going to go all that well. It just seems like he's coming into a world with a philosophy that is 10 years old. What does that look like in practice from your point of view, meaning in a policy sense, and the way that the Middle East is going to react to Trump? What do you think the world looks like with Donald Trump coming into office?
Well, clearly, he had the intention of ending the war in Ukraine somehow. And as we see with the Biden administration sabotaging that. But clearly, his original plan was to end the war in Ukraine and to concentrate the war against the axis of resistance, seeing that originally, out of the three competitors for US hegemony, China, Russia, and the axis of resistance, the US policymakers believe that the axis of resistance is the weakest of the three. And we saw that for 20 years prior to now, the US attempting to destroy basically any competition it has in Western Asia and North Africa. And they failed in that plan, and they had to rush in with the war of Ukraine because Russia and China were taking advantage of the US quagmire in the Arabic and Muslim world to develop as fast as possible. And in those 20, 30 years almost that the US started their war against the Arabic and Muslim peoples, China has become the number one industrial base in the world, and Russia has advanced militarily to be on par, if not more advanced than the West. So the plans of the US are not working out. But now, he had no choice in his mind but to go back to the original plan of defeating the axis of resistance, subjugating the Arabic and Muslim peoples before going into confrontation with Russia and China. And as we see, the Biden administration is not allowing him to stop the war in Ukraine by the decision that was made. Ultimately, what we have now as a cabinet that Trump proposed is not only Israel first, it's also Armageddonist. When you have one of these ministers with a crusader tattoo cross on his heart, that means that they are really going back as far as the crusade idea. Anyways, what we've been living for the last 100 years in Palestine is a crusade, and sometimes you can call it a Jewsade. The idea of creating a Jewish supremacist state is similar to creating a Christian crusader state in Palestine. And this is why we are seeing this genocide being committed in Gaza and in Lebanon right now. These are exactly the things that the Crusaders did in 1,000 years ago. A millennia ago, the Crusaders walked into Syria into Idlib and had a cannibalist feast. They actually burnt the whole city and ate all the people in it. And when they entered Jerusalem, there was a bloodbath of rivers of blood. This is the Crusaders. And now we see the Crusaders, a millennia later, doing the same thing. And of course, as in the Crusader states, the Crusader state cannot live longer than the Crusader states. The Crusader states lived like 100 years. Now we're reaching that 100 years since the Zionist project began with World War I. We're past that, so it's past its expiry date.
I guess my concern is that Trump is looking at this like, yes, I can isolate Iran again. And that's not the world we're in. I mean, the truth be told, I've always said that Joe Biden was the worst president we've ever had. Because on foreign policy sense, this notion of America, let's say dominance, it basically fell apart under Joe Biden. If you think of North Korea, if you think of Iran, those countries were isolated. Those countries are not isolated anymore at this point. Israel is definitely unsafe. Meaning, so from America's point of view and what America wanted to accomplish around the globe, it has not accomplished that. In fact, it has set the globe on fire. And if Trump goes in with this thought that he can somehow pressure Iran even to the point of war, that seems like utter chaos to me. I mean, Iran and Russia are signing a defense pact or some kind of defense agreement. It hasn't necessarily been outed yet, but it's clear that that's going to take place. China gets its oil from Iran to the tune of 90%. So if he goes in with this idea, for example, let me be specific. How do you think the Middle East, meaning Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, UAE, etc., are going to respond to Trump this time around as opposed to last time? Last time around, Donald Trump was very close with the Saudis. And that relationship with the Israelis, he went after Iran. Okay, well, is he still going to be close with the Saudis when he comes in this time around, especially if the Saudis is not on board with Donald Trump going after Iran? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, what we've been seeing in terms of the Saudis or the Emiratis and other Gulf countries, bringing down the heat in their confrontation with the Iranian government is just kind of theatrics. These Gulf countries are not real states. They have existed as vassals since their fabrication by the British. Yes. And, there is something like 60,000 American soldiers on the territory of the Saudi kingdom, surrounding specifically the oil fields. Similarly, the Emirates doesn't exist as a state. It's one out of 10 people inside the Emirate are actually citizens. So you have 90% of your population not citizens, foreign workers and so on, including your police force and so on. So this is not a real state. And that's true of Qatar and Bahrain and so on, which host the largest naval and air bases of the US in the world. So these states have been allowed, at least under Biden's regime, to play the usual, favorite, plots from the Democratic playbook, which is to play these intelligence, wars instead of direct wars. But when Trump comes in, you will see a huge change. Remember last time when Trump was there, he shook down all those Gulf states openly.
Right.
He whipped them on front of the cameras, called them cash cows, and they all bowed down, right? So there's not going to be a difference once he comes into power in terms of their ability to take any sovereign decisions. They are not sovereigns, they're vassals. Yeah.
Even Saudi Arabia. And the reason why I asked this for Saudi Arabia, when Joe Biden came in, they seemed to take a different tact. And they seemed to want it to, let's say, spread their wings a bit in looking at BRICS, and for that matter, still keeping the relationship with the United States. So they weren't completely obsequious in the way that they typically would have been. For example, when Joe Biden wanted the oil, they didn't just cut it by 1 million barrels, they cut it by 2 million barrels, almost to get across that they are not under Joe Biden's thumb, almost as somewhat of a resentment for some of the things that Joe Biden was saying. I guess my point is Saudi Arabia have seemed to try to diversify their allies, or at the very least diversify their business relationships and political relationships. You don't think that's going to matter, though, when Trump comes in?
Yes, because look, there is two wings to the empire. The liberal wing, that's like, the Democrats and something like Jordan, or and on the other hand, you have the conservative wing, and that's the Republicans, Trump, Israel with Netanyahu, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and so forth. So they feel more aligned with Trump. And we saw this battle between these two wings at its height during the quote-unquote Arab Spring, which I would call the Arab Autumn. Obama had his liberal plan to bring in the quote-unquote Muslim Democrats, the Muslim Brotherhood, into power in all of the Arabic and Muslim world, and to anoint Qatar and Turkey as the rulers of this province. But what happened is that the Saudis and the Israelis revolted against Obama's plan, and instead had all those waves of Wahhabi death squads invading the areas that Obama was trying to hand over to the Muslim Brotherhood. So there is a constant civil war unannounced between the conservative and liberal wing of the empire, and the most obvious places that you can see this struggle, war between the two wings, is here on the ground, and or as we saw in the streets of Washington on January 6th, 4 years ago. So there, this battle will, when Trump comes into power, the Saudis will feel comfortable, and you'll see them taking a stronger position against Iran and Russia, and things are, for now, look like that they have calmed down, but they will come back to the front.
Wow. Okay, so you believe this is all just cosmetic at this point? I guess we'll see. I mean, I guess my feeling on this is the way BRICS has organized itself. It's organized itself in a way where it seems to be using peace as a weapon. And I mean that in the sense of, we're going to bring down hostilities because the empire, as you may call it, uses hostility as a means to an end. So we're going to go after Taiwan in order to undercut China. We're going to go after Ukraine to undercut Russia. We're going to go after, use Israel to undercut the Middle East, and basically to create this kind of greater Israel. Whereas BRICS seems to be doing the opposite of that. We're going to bring down hostilities between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We're going to bring down hostilities between India and China. It just seems like a different operation that seems to be taking place among these two, let's say, forces within the context of the world. And it seems Saudi Arabia seems to be in the middle of that. Okay, fair enough. I'll go with that. Do you think Iran is going to go through with the attack that they kept saying they were going to go through with? Recent reports pointed out, and I don't necessarily take this as being true, this is coming out of Israel, that they destroyed a nuclear facility in Iran. Now, I don't believe that at all, but whatever. Even if I say that's true, do you think Iran is going to strike? I mean, they said they're going to do it, and they've been talking about it for the last several weeks, but up to this point, nothing has been done. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Iran will be responding. Obviously, all of us as analysts would have liked the response to come earlier, but we're not in the decision making, so I don't know what's the thoughts on inside those tight circles. Look, if Israel actually bombed a nuclear site in Iran, the whole West would have shown us all the satellite images, and they would have, said that they have felt the earthquake, and showed us and they would have even tested the air going into other countries from east of Iran, and said there is this nuclear, pollution or whatever. So no, it didn't happen. Most of the very important Iranian nuclear sites that could be used in a military way are under tens of meters, hundreds of meters of granite rock in the mountains. There's only a few exposed nuclear reactors, and they are for civilian electrical use. And the Israelis wouldn't dare attack those because the Iranians would attack the exposed nuclear reactors in Israel, in the Zionist colony, one of them being just beside Tel Aviv. So although all of us are worried, and we should be worried about a nuclear holocaust, in my mind, I still think that this is not going to happen because of the deterrence that, if you blow up the 2 nuclear reactors in the Zionist colony, half of the population is dead. Okay. While if you blow up a few nuclear reactors in Iran that are far away from the main cities, even let's say if you hit the ones that are near Tehran, it's almost 100 million population, Iran. So killing a few million Iranians is not going to change the reality, while killing a few million Israelis will end the Zionist colony. Yeah.
Do you think Iran is going to switch? I mean, up to this point, it's been the Ayatollah that has prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And in a recent conversation, they pointed out that technically we can build this weapon. We choose not to do so. Do you think that with the pressure campaign that the U.S. is putting on, that they're going to look to North Korea in the way that North Korea is thinking, we have a weapon, so you can't attack us because we have this kind of weapon, that they're going to change their policy on development of nuclear weapons?
Well, there's 2 things that our viewers need to know. Number one is that North Korea's, or the Democratic Republic of Korea's nuclear and missile program were developed in coordination with Iran and Syria. Well, so that means that...
I know that.
Yes. So that means that everything that North Korea has, already both Syria and Iran have, at least if we don't have proof that they have the actual physical weapons and missiles, they actually have the knowledge. Secondly, I would say that there is a lot of indication and analysis from military analysts that are very close to the Iranian and Syrian government that for a long time have been saying that Iran and Syria actually have at least 1 nuclear head each, and that those nuclear heads were handed over by patriotic revolutionary generals and scientists at the collapse of the Soviet Union, from those weapons that were supposed to be taken away from Ukraine's. And this is the reason, actually, that Damascus was not directly occupied, because Syrian government threatened to use that 1 nuke they have. And this is the other reason why the West has been pressuring over the last decade Iran, because a nuclear head has a lifespan of around 30-35 years. And so you count from the collapse of the Soviet Union till now, those 2 nuclear heads that Iran and Syria have are coming to the end of their lifespan. And this is why the West is pressuring Iran, thinking that let's stop them from having the knowledge to create their own weapon before the expiry date on the warheads that are there happens. And one final thing I would say, to show you how much actually everything that Korea has, Syria has, and Iran has, is, the North Koreans were building a nuclear reactor in Syria in the end of the 2000s outside Deir ez-Zor, and the US and Israel attacked it and blew it up. So that shows you how much actually, much of what we hear about this story is controlled information. All of these parties, including Iran, is playing along with the theatrics. The US is playing around with the theatrics that Iran doesn't have a weapon. Iran is playing that also, and it's convenient for everybody. But truthfully, no one can attack Iran with a nuclear weapon. No one can attack Syria with a nuclear weapon. If we do enter that phase, it means the end of humanity and nuclear winter for all the world. Even if you don't believe that Iran and Syria have nuclear weapons, once the US or Israel uses nuclear weapons against these countries, then Belarus will use nuclear weapons to defend Iran. President Lukashenko said that he would provide a nuclear umbrella to protect Iran. North Korea will use nuclear weapons. And this is not even bringing up Russia or China, who will also be most probably using nuclear weapons to defend themselves against the US. A use of any nuclear weapon against the axis of resistance will lead to a nuclear holocaust. So people should just not worry about it.
Wow. That is so disturbing on so many levels. I mean, in one case, I had, the conversation where Joe Biden is whistling past the graveyard of a third world war. And in this case, people may forget Israel is a nuclear power. And as you pointed out, whether or not Iran proper has a nuclear weapon, that they have an umbrella of other countries. I mean, for God's sake, Russia and Iran are coming up with some kind of security arrangement. We haven't seen it. We don't even know what it is yet. But I would imagine that, the existence of Iran will be part of the strategic axis of Russia. Basically, Russia's not necessarily going to allow Iran to go into that good night. So no, I accept that. I accept your take on this one, that any kind of attack on Iran with nuclear weapons is basically a full-blown nuclear war by other parties that get involved into it. Wow. I want to, before I let you, we have to close it, but before I let you go, what is taking place on the ground in Lebanon right now? From my understanding, Israel has been losing right many people, and they've been trying to get a lot of the ultra-Orthodox into the military, and they have not necessarily been doing all that well in getting that group into the military. Also, from my understanding, a lot of people either haven't been necessarily showing up or telling other people not to show up because of the difficulty of the service that they're engaged in, especially in Lebanon. What is taking place on the ground militarily in southern Lebanon?
Well, according to the Israeli, reports in the mainstream media of Israel, the Zionist military is missing around 20%, just over 20% of recruits.
Right.
So when they're calling in the reservists, 20% of them are not showing up. And now you couple that with the story that just came out a few days ago that Canada gave in the last year expedited citizenship to 10,000 Israelis, then you can extrapolate how much did the US give citizenship to, and how many did Germany and the UK and Australia and France. So we're talking about, probably 1 million Israelis that have been given citizenship already in the West. This is above and beyond the ones that already had dual citizenship. And then we can couple it with another story that just came out also a few days ago in Germany, that the German government has offered 40,000 refugees from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places in Africa expedited citizenship if they go and serve in the Israeli military. And that those 40,000 are already serving on the ground inside Gaza and on the border with Lebanon. And then you add to it the story that if our viewers remember, at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, Biden went down to the Zionist colony, and there was a picture of him with the Navy special, force, with the faces uncovered, and the American military and government got really pissed off that
I remember that. Leaked. I do remember that. Yeah.
So we know that actually all the special forces of the West, including the Canadian Task Force 2, German, French, Italian, whatever, are actually on the ground. So when we are being told by Israel, after we see an image of an Israeli tank being blown up in Gaza or Lebanon, that one Israeli soldier is dead, that means that at least 3 mercenaries that from all around the world that have been gathered and offered citizenship are also dead.
Yeah.
All right. So we don't also
know. I see your point. Your point.
So we don't know how many also special forces are dying from the West. In general, the Israeli military is defeated completely. Yesterday, for 3 days in a row, they were trying to, make a huge land line into the third line villages on the coastline around Naqoura, the Israelis, after failing to capture any of the frontline villages. They tried to go around them and cut off, and they got clobbered. They had to retreat. And the Golani Brigade, the top most elite force within Israel, have just announced that they have had more losses on the front of Lebanon in those 45 days, 47 days now, than their history combined since the creation of the Zionist colony. So they're not giving us numbers, but we already have clear indications that the Israeli military is defeated on the ground, that even all those hordes of mercenaries are not bringing any result. Even the special forces of all the West are not capable of delivering a victory for the Zionists, and that is why they're going on a rampage since yesterday, the Israelis, of bombarding civilian infrastructure and location. For instance, they bombed Beirut 18 times yesterday.
Yeah, I call it blackmail. I mean, I look at it as blackmail. It's like, we want to take the South. We can't take it militarily, so we're just going to bomb and kill women and children until we get the government to agree to our terms. Laith, I'm going to have to let you go, man, but thank you for this. I really appreciate your explanation of this. Some of the stuff is just mind-blowing. I don't want to say terrifying, but, you know, the stakes and what this country is involved in is disgusting, to put it mildly. We're backing a genocide. Laith, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. Laith Maroof,
thank you.
He's an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. You can follow Laith. Laith, what's your website, by the way? I have cacenter.org. Is that correct?
Well, that's my actual job as a media consultant, but the website for the it's freepalestine.video if people want to, you know, watch the content that we're producing from the West Bank, Lebanon, and Jordan. We're bringing daily reports from the ground there in English.
Oh, very cool, man. I'm going to check that out, and I'm going to have to put that into your bio. Thank you for this, Laith. I really appreciate it. All right. I want to bring in my next guest. We are joined with one of my favorite people, Margaret Kimberly. Easily a big friend of the show. Margaret Kimberly is a senior columnist and editor at Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial, Black America, and the Presidents. Oh, Margaret, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing okay. I'm getting up a little earlier than usual, which is an indication of how much I like you. But anyway.
I appreciate that. I'm sorry for waking you up early.
It's okay.
I just kept the same, well, for the most, when the show ended, I just kept the same pattern.
Sure, it's okay. I'm just teasing you a little bit, but it's good to be back.
I greatly appreciate you joining me. And I've asked everybody who's come on to the show, especially everybody that deals with politics, the same question: how did Kamala Harris spend $1 billion in 3 months to lose to a man that they call racist, fascist, Hitler, sexual abuser, an insurrectionist? They called him everything but a child of God. And yet he did not just win, he even won the popular vote. How did Harris spend $1 billion to lose this race? Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I think there's a bigger issue for her. The Republicans are the party that had the Democratic nominating process. Donald Trump went through the primary. It was clear that Republican voters wanted him, regardless of what the Republican establishment wanted, or regardless of people who didn't like him wanted. Republicans wanted him. He had solid support from his people. She, on the other hand, was the top-down choice. A mess because Biden, it's funny to me. I think of these people as being cutthroats, the Democratic big, rich donors and so forth, but they really thought they could just sneak Biden in again. They thought nobody noticed his declining health, his frailty. But anyway,
well, now they're blaming him, though. Just to interrupt real quick, now they're blaming Biden. Like the same people who said Biden was sharp attack. Every time I see him, he's awesome. He runs, a mile in 4 minutes. All of those people are now like, well, Joe Biden should have gotten out the race early. He was clearly out of his mind.
Yes, okay. I know. What's that expression? Success has 1,000 fathers, failure is an orphan. So of course, everybody's turning. There's a lot of finger pointing now.
Pretty much.
But and the other issue is Kamala Harris herself. She is a person who I say has been promoted above her skill set. She's not a good politician. She doesn't connect with people. She can't even connect. These interviews I saw, friendly interviews, she was always nervous. The nervous laugh, the word salad, non sequiturs. I think it was Stephen Colbert who asked her, well, how are you different from Biden? I would think she'd been briefed on that and had an answer, but she just says, well, I'm not Trump. Well, that doesn't tell anybody anything. And as far as this $1 billion, I think, and she's not the first Democrat to raise $1 billion. Hillary raised $1 billion. Biden raised $1 billion.
So did
Obama, his second run, raised $1 billion. So they're the money party.
Mm-hmm.
Finance capital, Silicon Valley, they prefer the Democrats and they have lots of cash. But there's something else that no one is talking about that I think caused her to lose. And that was the end of the COVID support programs. What people had, there are millions of people who are struggling and they're never talked about. So the child tax credit was huge for them. People who got to stay on Medicaid, got to get SNAP, the little stimulus pay, not so little for some people. And then one day they were gone. Poof. And with no explanation that most people can understand. You can talk about, the Senate process or Manchin and Sinema or the parliamentary, whatever their excuse was never explained to the American people. She never made it a campaign issue. It seems to me you would say, I need a big Democratic majority so we can bring back the child tax credit. Something, anything. But I think it's now, 7 or 8 million people who voted for Biden who did not vote for her, who did not vote.
Yeah, I pointed it out on the show. I think Joe Biden had like 81 million votes. Harris had 71 million. It might be up to 73 now, but at that point,
I think it's up to 73.
Yeah,
but it's a big chunk of people.
Yeah.
Trump he got 74 million votes the last time. Now he's up to 76. So Trump got 2 million more voters this time than last time.
Yep.
And she lost a big chunk of Biden people. And I think this decision to not address any issues that impact ordinary people, it killed her. And there's another group of people that they didn't think about, and that's the infrequent voter. The low motivation vote. There's some people who they're going to vote no matter what. You don't need to coax them. You don't need to convince them. And then there are people for whom it is not a priority. And when you have a child tax credit 1 month and don't have it the next, and you don't get an explanation, then you're one of those people. Mm-hmm. So I think it was her weaknesses as a candidate, the fact that her website, which had nothing on it for 50 days. You think nobody noticed? You couldn't take her seriously. She's a lightweight. In every way possible. So I think those are all of the things that led to her loss. And that means you can have all the money in the world and you can pay, Oprah, not Oprah directly, but Harpo Productions, a couple $1 million for a concert. That does not get you anything with the people I just talked about. I also think this illusion, I hope this is the last time we hear about never Trump Republicans. Yes. They do not exist. My line is they are like unicorns. They are mythical creatures. And she spent more than a month talking about Republican voters and Liz Cheney of all people, who Republicans don't even like, by the way. So, you can pump in all the cash that you want. You can have a huge staff of people. And the other thing is the Democratic Party, these consultants are the worst. Yeah. They get rich every 4 years, whether they lose or whether they win. There's a revolving door of these people, some giving sometimes good advice, sometimes bad advice, and this time it was all bad, but no one talks about them.
I think they strongly need a civil war in the Democratic Party. Absolutely. This group of liberals are the most weak and out of touch that I've ever seen. For one, they have taken this idea of, quote, progressive and just made it woke stuff. So they've completely disassociated the economic lefty populism that used to be part of the Democratic Party, especially around this notion of unions and everything else. She went running around with Liz Cheney, and as you pointed out, was looking for Republicans as opposed to getting her base out. So it's like, while she's out there trying to get one group, 8 million people stayed at home, which is just outrageous when you think about it. Like, Trump could have gotten his exact same numbers. If she would have had Joe Biden numbers, she would have won the race by like 4 million votes.
Yeah.
And yet that didn't occur to her. In her mind, I'm going to go around with Liz Cheney and get these unicorn Republicans that hate Trump. Okay, but that didn't work. That didn't work.
It didn't.
And go for it.
When you said there needs to be a civil war, that needs to happen among Black people. Black people should be angry. Instead of trying to defend her, instead of spending all their time talking about Trump being a fascist, people want to have marches on Inauguration Day. You need to march to the DNC.
Yeah.
And Black people depend and we act like we live and die based on whether a Democrat or a Republican is in the White House. A Democrat wins, hooray. A Republican wins, oh no. Well, I should leave the country. It's the end of the people acting like there's an apocalypse because Donald Trump won. And when there was an apocalypse, when people lost their COVID money, that was their apocalypse. So there needs to be a civil war against the Republican, these people who run the party who are worthless. If you can't win the origin of the word campaign, a campaign is a war. It's a battle. Yeah. And these people who lose a war and then shrug their shoulders and count their money and know they'll be in the next campaign, regardless of how well they did. And people saying she ran a good campaign. The loser did not run a good campaign.
Yeah. I mean, Joy-Ann Reid got on TV and said her campaign was flawless. And I know it was flawless because Queen Latifah endorsed her, and Queen Latifah doesn't endorse anybody. And it's like, are you serious? Like, these limo liberals who are sitting on TV, got all the money in the world, and are acting like the world is coming to an end, when the reality is they will be okay. It's everybody else that's going to take the hit.
And the people who aren't okay weren't okay under Biden, and that's why they didn't come out.
Exactly. The wild part about it is Kamala Harris ran the exact campaign that Chuck Schumer advised her to run. And I don't know if you remember this clip. Chuck Schumer, it was a few years ago, where Schumer was talking about this idea of basically how to marginalize the left. Because that's effectively what it was. This idea that the left is too difficult. You have to work so hard to get money from these rich folks because the left want things like Social Security and Medicare and expansion of those things. Like, all things being equal, I have this point of view that the Democrats, for the most part, hate the left. And
they do. They hate the left more than they hate the right.
Yeah, because it puts me in the mind of, do you remember when Sanders was running? Chris Matthews came out and said something to the effect of, well, it's better for Sanders to lose to Trump than it is for Sanders to take the party for a generation. And I think what they run into is this idea of, okay, we need money to run a campaign because Kamala Harris had to get $1 billion from somewhere. All right. The people who we're going to ask that money for, they don't need healthcare. They don't need education. They don't need any of these programs that you want because they already got the money in order to get those programs. And so if you're a Democrat, and that's the crisis point, that's the contradiction in the way that you run, would it not be easier to be able to get either Republicans or people on the right that really don't care about those items? And Chuck Schumer made that point extremely clear.
And it's already won a large percentage of those people over. On the other hand, Trump is so new that for every, this is the second point, for every blue-collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up 2, 3 moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin. The voters who are most out there figuring out what.
Just be clear, that didn't work.
No, that's from 2016. That's how Hillary Clinton failed. And they're still doing it.
That is literally the campaign she ran. Like, and they told her behind the scenes, they were like, oh God, will she stop running around with Liz Cheney? Who the hell does she think like Liz Cheney? I mean, like, you're literally talking about Darth Vader's daughter, and you are arguing that Donald Trump is horrible and a fascist and Hitler, while the body count that is on Dick Cheney is astonishing from the standpoint of that war. And Liz Cheney is the same type of person that her dad is. Like, this contradiction never really made sense. Hey,
No.
Kamala Harris, you're the change candidate. What are you going to do different? I can't think of anything. Okay, but you're the change candidate. How can you not think of anything? Like, it's an astonishingly bad campaign. And so these people saying, you know, she was great, she was flawless, it was because she was a Black woman, that was the issue. It's like, okay, just stop.
Like, why didn't Black people come out for her? How much of a drop-off was there among Black people?
Yeah.
So Black people are racist against Black people? I mean, there was I think it was a silly argument about whether she should be considered Black or not. I considered her Black. I also don't want to get into what I think is an irrelevant conversation. Yes. But are you really saying that Black people who voted for Biden but wouldn't come out for her were racist? Is that what we want to say?
Some of them have said that the Biden administration was racist because of the way they treated her. And it's like, so it's like, dude, they nominated a Black woman for that role, and now that she lost, you guys are blaming Biden and saying that his team was racist. Like, that's some of the arguments that these people are making.
You know, I think the blame goes back, I'd say, to 2020, and they rigged it for Biden. They got everybody else out. Bernie hung around for briefly, but then he capitulated too. It was clear then that Biden was not up to the task.
Right.
It was clear then. I and other people said there's something wrong. And what did they tell you? It was a stutter. He has a stutter. And I was like, no, it's not a stutter. It's if he can't get words out, I don't think it's because of stuttering. He's not well. You know, I can't diagnose him. I'm not a medical professional, but he appears like everybody I've ever known who experienced the cognitive decline. That's what it reminds me of. I can put it that way. But they pushed him through. And these people who I think of as being cutthroat, instead just let him go on. I kept saying, they're not going to run him again, are they? They're not going to run Biden again, are they? But sure enough, they tried. And then they had that debate in June, and he face planted. And some say that was a plot to get him out, and then try to think of someone. I don't know what they did, but they weren't looking out for the party. They weren't looking out for him. They didn't certainly care about their voters. And now I'm supposed to act like the stormtroopers are coming up the street because Trump is the president, and start, now this is silly thing, scrutinizing every Trump appointment. No, I don't think RFK Jr. should be the, Secretary of Health and Human Services.
I so disagree with you on this. He caused
a measles outbreak in Samoa. Did you know that? Do you know that story?
I did know that.
Like, how do you have a guy who caused a measles outbreak as the head of Health and Human Services? But go ahead. I'm interested in what you have to say about that. Go ahead.
Fair enough. I totally accept the deficits associated with RFK. The benefits of RFK is the man was a corporate lawyer, and he looks at these companies, especially from the standpoint of health, with a certain amount of skepticism.
Well,
and his argument basically is pretty straightforward. It's like, look, we pay twice as much as every other country around the world for healthcare. We get half the results, meaning we die 10 years younger than everywhere else around the globe, despite the fact that we're supposed to be a modern nation. And does that have something to do with what we eat, what we put into our foods, what we allow in our foods? I can tell you, my ex-girlfriend used to be from Austria. She wouldn't eat a lot of the stuff that they had here because she's like, oh God, this is illegal in Europe. Oh, we don't put this in our food.
Well, I think you're right. But here's my question. I mean, who goes around defending Big Pharma? Nobody, unless they work for Big Pharma themselves. But are these people just going to go away and let RFK Jr. do away with direct marketing of pharmaceuticals to people, which I think was one of the worst things to ever happen? But we have a bad outcome, mostly because we do not have a real public health care system. I think that's the biggest reason. Yes, we have bad food, but that's my other question. These lobbyists, they're just going to sit around and let RFK Jr. put them out of business or take some of their profits. And Donald Trump, that's going to be okay with him? I don't think so, but we'll see.
I put it this way, from my point of view, it will be interesting to watch. That's my point of view. Because it's like, I don't believe these people are working in my best interest. And so having somebody that's a wrecking ball go into there that I know at the very least has that point of view, I can sit back and watch and see what happens. I agree. Look, I agree with you. It's going to be chaos. And I think pretty much all of these picks, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, I am terrified by.
Well, I'm a little different. It's like this guy, this, Fox and Friends goofball is Secretary of Defense.
Right.
I think it's hilarious. First of all, I keep telling people, if you have my political point of view, if you're an anti-imperialist left person, you shouldn't care who's the Secretary of Defense. The Pentagon is going to do what the Pentagon does. That's the scary thing about the Pentagon itself. That it's this the Pentagon is the world's biggest polluter. They're right, aren't we? In the latest COP meeting, climate agreement, kicking the can down the road, waste of time. But the Pentagon is the world's biggest polluter. How can it not be, with 800 bases around the world? The U.S., the Pentagon is used to terrorize other countries. Even to keep supposed allies in line. The nature of the Pentagon does not change. If you get somebody smart, dumb, qualified, unqualified, the Pentagon itself is scary. So I'm not going to lose any sleep about who run. And also, these permanent government deep state guys, they're going to let some goofball ruin the Pentagon? I don't think so. So aside from having fun with it, I don't care. I know that everybody he's going to pick is someone I don't like, but that's also true of Democrats.
That's the thing I was about to say. It's when people are complaining, it's like, well, it's not like Joe Biden's policies on this stuff were to the left. Like, meaning, how far right can you go beyond Joe Biden? I don't know. I don't even know if there's that much space.
I mean, you could go further to the right. And then it was all pretense. And that's another thing that I think hurt Kamala Harris. Remember that nonsense they were trying to sell us? He was the most progressive president since FDR. They oversold. And I think that was to keep progressives in line. That was to shut progressives up. But then, of course, you have these programs that people need, and then they disappear. And you think people didn't remember after you said, most progressive since FDR, and then they look up and everything's gone?
Where do you think they go after this? I got to be honest. I have no answer to this question. Like, I don't even know where to begin on this question. Because truth is, it's not like when Trump lost, Trump still had a coalition. That coalition didn't go anywhere. It still was pro-Trump. When Sanders lost, Sanders still had a coalition. That coalition is still loosely affiliated, but that shows like the level of stick-to-itiveness that they were associated with Sanders. They would have crawled over hot glass to make that vote. Democrats don't have that. There was nobody who really loved Joe Biden or loved Kamala Harris. They were just people who hated Donald Trump. And her entire argument was framed around, we hate this Nazi, fascist, sexual abuser, felon. This is who we hate, and this is who we need to stop. And what I think is many Democrats think that Kamala Harris ran a perfect campaign because from their point of view, from their lens, that is exactly who Trump is. And when you name Trump like this, other people will obviously see him through that same lens, in which case they wouldn't vote for him. Missing the fact that that's your lens. That's just you as Democrats that believe that.
And there are people who don't like Trump who aren't going to bother to vote if they don't like the person running.
Exactly.
They forgot that too. This assumption that everybody who came out for Biden would come out for her.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. And there's another thing too. The oligarchs run politics in this country.
Yes.
We just talked about how the Democrats are the party of the wealthy.
Yes.
And they run politics. So they would not give her $1 billion or even $500 million if she talked about the things I just said she should have talked about.
Exactly.
They don't want to hear that. That's why Build Back Better never happened. That's why these programs ended. These rich people run the Democratic Party.
I'm going to show you this. This is right here. So Ken Klippenstein put this up. And they were going into, the exit polling. I was fascinated by the exit polling. And one of the things had to do with class, economy, solidarity. And basically, the main reason people said they liked the Democratic Party. All right. When you look at, in the old days, back in the 30s, they represent the working class. That was all the way up at the top. If you look today, it is down to what, 11%?
Mhm.
Like, that's astonishing. Like, meaning the context of the Democratic Party has fundamentally changed. When I
Yep.
was growing up, the Democratic Party was the party of the working class. That was a
Mhm.
party that was going to deal with increased wages, increase the Social Security, increases the Medicare, universal health care, etc. Then Sanders ran, and they did everything in their power to destroy Sanders, which made it clear, okay, they don't believe in these things in real terms. They
No.
just said the stuff. All right. So I guess if the public is looking at the Democratic Party as being the release valve to the capitalistic system, and they are not that, and the public doesn't see them as that, then how are they even a viable party at this point? They've lost, it's almost like their main philosophical mandate of existence to the Republican Party, to a billionaire, to a blue-collar billionaire. I guess my thought is, where do they go from here now? I don't have an answer for that question. I wonder if
I
you
don't either. They're gonna I think it's gonna be the last time they try to run anybody without a primary. I suspect that as much, but they're gonna run the primary process too. And even, Bernie was a liberalish reformer, but they
Yeah,
acted like he was a communist.
yeah.
He tried to sell some of that socialistic DSA stuff, but
Uh-huh.
he was never that. Um, and So what are they going to do? They don't want a leftist. Leftists will not be allowed to
Right.
get the nomination. They're going to try to get an Obama-like figure, someone who can give the appearance of being a change candidate when they're really not. I don't know who that is. It could be someone nobody's thinking about now. Who's no one's thinking about now. So I'm sure they're not going to just go away and disappear. But they've got a couple of years to think about it, for those rich people to figure out. And I wonder how they feel about it. You wasted our money. I mean, what
$1
are they
billion.
gonna
That's so much money. And James Carville recently came out and said, effectively, maybe Sanders was right. And he was like, people want health care, people want education, people want increased minimum wage. Minimum wage wins 70% of the time. We weren't talking about any of that stuff. And it's like, no duh. No duh. Like, that's the most aggravating.
They don't even mean that. They don't
Yeah.
even mean that. They just have to say something in the wake of her defeat. Has Carville ever said, did he say that during this campaign? No.
No.
So these people are now, they're being phony now because she face planted so badly. But that's absolutely true. They won't even give the appearance. They won't even say, okay, in order to win this campaign, we've got to claim we want this thing or that thing. The oligarchs have a complete hold on the Democratic Party, and they're going to try to find someone who can get their vote of approval, but who can market themselves as caring about the people.
Yeah, and Obama was that guy. And like, I'm realizing how politically astute Obama was. Like, he was just politically gifted. I mean, because it wasn't like the party was anything fundamentally different during his term. He was just a better candidate.
But you know what saved us when Obama was president? The obstruction from the Republicans, the racism of the Republicans. He offered them austerity. Remember his grand bargain? He puts that everything's on the table, including Social Security.
Yeah.
And they wanted to defeat him. So they said, no, we have to thank Mitch McConnell for not cutting our Social Security instead of Obama.
You remember when Mitt Romney ran, and Mitt Romney didn't even write a concession speech because he thought he was going to win.
Yeah.
And he gets out there and has the right to speech at the last minute, realizing, oh my God, I've lost these battleground states. Margaret, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me on this. And look, I agree with everything that has come out of your mouth today. Thank you for joining me. Margaret Kimberly, senior columnist and editor to Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial, Black America, and the Presidents. You can follow Margaret on Kimberly on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. And you can find her work at blackagendareport.com. Thank you for this, Margaret. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. All right. Let's go to our next guest. We're joined with the one and only Peter Coffin. How you doing, Peter? You doing all right this morning?
Yeah, I am. How about yourself?
I am doing fine. I've had a great show today up to this point. So I want to
let's see what we can do.
I know, right? Let's go to like, hopefully I won't disappoint you.
No.
You've been on the show for a few times, so the audience has always loved you when you come on the show. And just so the audience will know, Peter Coffin, he's a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore reality in a world where profit is the driving force. and Lord knows that is our world. I saw you, Alex Jones. I don't know if the audience knows, but there's been a bit of a kerfuffle, to call it lightly, with Alex Jones.
That would be the word he would use, I would think.
Kerfuffle.
Yeah.
So
it's been a kerfuffle, everybody. Okay.
Right, right. So Jones gets into trouble. I don't know if people remember this. Jones got into trouble for saying that the people in, I believe, Sandy Hook were crisis actors. Now, this is disgusting. Just to put it mildly, right? These people were murdered, and you're basically telling people that their kids weren't really killed, but they were just actors. So this created a mess where he gets sued. Now, up to this point, I agree with the suit until it's come down with the price. What, it was like $1 billion or some insane number?
I think it was $1.5 billion.
Yeah, some insane number. And I'm like, okay, that's absurd. That's utterly ridiculous. And tell me if you agree with that.
Oh, absolutely. InfoWars, for one, never has been worth even close to that.
No.
I mean, they have been a profitable operation. I don't know what they've been doing.
But not $1 billion. He's not a billionaire.
No.
And they did that entirely to close him down because they didn't like what he did. And if you remember, social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those places at the exact same time, it's like, we're taking you off air. Now, again, I hate this because, and I remember, look, I'm not a fan of Alex Jones stuff, even though he's very entertaining. By the same token, this is outrageous to me. Like, it feels like a concerted effort to take the man off the air, or for that matter, take the man off radio, or for that matter, get rid of his show. And then the final indignity, and I'm going to bring you in, The Onion, because they were selling his stuff through the courts, and The Onion came out and was like, we'll buy him. Now, the problem came in, and this is comical on his face, right? This is humor in action. This is experiential humor. The problem came in because it became clear that The Onion was not the highest bidder, and that whoever was involved in that was intentionally trying to create a mockery of InfoWars by selling it to The Onion, in which case the judge gets involved and puts a hold on the sale. Now, did I explain all that right? Because it was a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, that's my understanding of this. Yeah, that's my understanding of the situation as well.
This seems to be outrageous to me. For one, they're picking on him. There's that. Two, they're trying to get rid of this organization. Three, the people who wanted to buy it, there was a right-wing group that were going to buy it. They prevented them and was going to give it to The Onion on credit. Am I getting that right?
As far as I am aware, yes. I don't think that I think that's pretty much exactly what happened. But I don't know if you saw this. Did you see that Elon Musk actually, or X rather, has filed something as an interested party as well?
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. Oh, that's super interesting.
Isn't it?
InfoWars is just his media site, right? Like, that's
it's his company.
Okay. Yeah.
So I assume also you get the supplements in with that as well. So you don't just get the media site, you get the supplement business.
It's like all the man products that you want 50% off once you buy.
Yeah, you get your virility back along with a large news site.
Those are those gay frogs. I'm fascinated by this. Give me your take on this. I ran my mouth far too long. Give me your take on this. Just the entire episode. It's so bizarre, but it is Alex.
It is, isn't it? It's. I mean, clearly there's a serious problem if the highest bidder did not get the auction. I mean, of course, you're entitled to sell to whoever you want, but this isn't, just private property that like some billionaire owns. It's like a court injunction business that is in bankruptcy. It's a completely different situation than that. In the case of this type of a situation where this is the government getting involved with something, you would normally have to take the highest bidder, because I think there's something involved. I can't confirm that or anything, but in my experience,
I think that's true, because that was the precedent that he used in order to get the judge to intervene to stop the Onion. Because the reports at that point was Onion has purchased InfoWars, in which case everybody laughed. And I saw your clip.
I mean, it's hilarious.
Yeah, right. You were pointing out like, hey, I want to take the lead host role.
Yeah, I got it. I put up a video. Yeah, I said, well, I'm basically the same thing. I'm an anti-imperialist, which is pretty much an anti-globalist, except for I don't have anti-Semitic or esoteric explanations for any of it. I just went into a whole bunch of stuff like that. And it's pretty much like that's the reason I think everybody, who's kind of dissident, at least has an affinity for Alex Jones in some way. They don't necessarily agree with him or like, what he says. I particularly disdain what he said about the Sandy Hook families, but
stuff, yeah.
I think a lot of people have those somewhat of an affinity for, because he's also very entertaining.
He's very entertaining,
but he has a lot of these views.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just agreeing with you.
He has a lot of. Yeah, he has a lot of these views, except for he just kind of doesn't have great explanations for them. But like, he's right. The WEF is bad. Yes. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. True.
Yeah. I remember it was, I think it was Donald Trump, when Donald Trump first got in office and he fired missiles at Syria. And he came out off the cuff and gave a 30-minute speech of ranting and flipping out, basically saying, the Syrians were helping fight ISIS, and they were fighting the globalists. And how are you attacking the people that were fighting the like? He went off, and I'm sitting there watching, like, okay, 50% of this is right.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's with Alex Jones, right? Like, there's a percentage of it that's right. That if you don't know too much, you might be enticed by it.
Yeah.
Like, it's so wild.
I know a lot, and I'm enticed by it. I just know what's not right too.
By the way, do you think he's faking, or do you think? I think he's faking. I think he's playing a character. I'm always freaked out by the people who don't.
I think it's semi-fake. I don't think it's entirely fake, but I think that it's played up. It's like, I'm obviously like playing up like all of the humorous elements of this right now.
Yeah,
because it's funny, but I think that he's playing up. Like, I think he's like that, but I think he's less like that than, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he's expanding his character more than basically.
Yeah,
this is his base nature. He's taking it up to 10.
Yeah, he probably gets a good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? I'm just gonna get my coffee right now, and then he goes to work and it's like, good morning, everybody.
So how much? I guess I don't know if you know how much they were trying to sell it for. I mean, the bank. I mean, basically, he has to pay off the lawsuit, and so
yeah, he had to pay off the lawsuit.
They get $1 billion for InfoWars, do they?
They're like a $30-40 million total worth. Like, and that's mostly the supplement business, in all seriousness.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could possibly pay that out. I guarantee they probably bring in maybe between 400,000 and probably 2 million a year. And it's not a big, that's a lot of money. I would like that money, but I couldn't run a business off of that kind of money like what he's doing.
I guess is what the court doing is basically saying, okay, we're going to sell. It's almost like if your car was repossessed. It's like, all right, you owe X amount and we're going to sell the car. Okay, well, we sold it for, 10,000, you owe another 5,000 on it. Is it going to be that where it's like, we're going to sell InfoWars in order to pay the money that you owe the court? However, we're never going to be able to get $1.5 billion for InfoWars. So you're still going to owe basically $1.3 billion after we sell the company. That just seems so wrong to me.
To me, it seems, I think the objective is just to shut down InfoWars. I think, I don't know if they will actually, like, if they get, maybe he'll owe some money, but I have a feeling he won't owe $1.5 billion because it's just physically impossible. Like, it's such an absurd number. And here's the thing. The original thing, as much as I really dislike what he said about the Sandy Hook family, I mean, that was disgusting. They were pretty cool. Yeah. I can't, it's really trash. But at the same time, we live in the United States of America with the First Amendment. You're supposed to be able to say trash.
Right.
And the thing is you and I, we have similar political viewpoints. I might be a little more extreme in some areas, I'm not sure. But like, I am very, very worried when stuff like this happens and then reaches this kind of a conclusion where they're actually able to shut him down. And this is via governmental means. Like, lawsuits are, like, the judicial wing is a wing of the government. So it's not like there isn't an agenda here. And it's an agenda that silences somebody using the government, basically.
I mean, look, I I no longer have a job, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
my,
no,
I
I
was,
mean, I'm speaking to the choir here.
yeah. It's like I always joke. It's like my voice was so subversive that they had to take me off the airwaves. Like I was such a dangerous man, and like it is a head trip when that happens. Like because you function right, and you just kind of do your thing, and it's like okay, well I'm doing my job. This is my job. This is my belief set. And then you find out, okay, well, the government doesn't like your belief set. Okay, well, we have a First Amendment, whatever, man. The government doesn't have to like it. And
Yeah.
then you find out, oh, wait, they can pass sanctions, and the sanctions can shut down your network. And it's like
exactly
you're doing that because you don't like what we're saying. Like this tiny podunk station of about 50 people, you are taking that level of escalatory action to shut us up. That's astonishing to me. That is hard for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah,
That
it's like
happens.
a similar yeah, it's similar kind of lawfare too. It's just, I mean, with Sputnik, it was actually, in my opinion, even more explicitly government action because it kind of came from internal to the government, whereas this lawsuit
Blinken came out, gave a speech.
yeah, I think this lawsuit is no, it's obscene. It's, I mean, we really, I mean, I you know, my stuff is all through YouTube. I put things up that way. But I also know that I have 250,000 subscribers and I get like 2,000, 3,000 views on a video. I know that there's something going on there. Like that's not correct, you know? And
that's
the
not
fact
accurate.
is,
right.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. That's not, and I've had that since 2015 when I threw in with Bernie as hard as I could.
You know,
so it's kind of like
there to you though, you know, one of the things that they were doing with social media, like the Twitter files, the government was lobbying to get people silence, like shadow banning.
Yep.
They did it to RFK apparently, where they were shadow banning his account, and they even pointed out it's not that you're saying anything incorrect; it's just unfortunate that you're saying it, which makes it even worse.
Yeah. No, I hate that. I absolutely hate that. Like the Hunter Biden laptop thing, I think is the most prominent example out of the Twitter files. It's just absolutely obscene. It's crazy. And all of this, it all fits into the same category. The Twitter files, the Alex Jones lawsuit. Like a lot of the time they are shutting down people that I disagree with and that say weird things or bad things or stuff that I would never say, but it doesn't matter if I would never say it. Like the basis of our country is that you're allowed to say it. So there's something very wrong there. And like, let's say they decide one day that, you know, somebody who's calling themselves a socialist or a communist or whatever, they're the problem. I mean, we went through several decades like that.
Right.
And they put those people in jail. Like this country doesn't function as it says it functions and hasn't for a very long time. The Red Scare was proof of that. And a second Red Scare would not particularly interest me. I'll say that. It's and when I see this happen to these right-wing people, that's the first thing I think of. It's like they don't like what they're saying. Doesn't matter how true it is. Doesn't matter if it's absurdist. Doesn't matter if it's completely real. They don't like what they're saying and they can take it down in some manner, whether it's, you know, dodging the, you know, direct channels and hiring some team of lawyers to handle it, or just directly like through the Twitter files, they just, you know, call up Mark Zuckerberg like, yeah, you need to take Alex Jones down today.
I mean, I think we're going to go through something similar even with Trump. Donald Trump has said the first thing that he's going to do is this. Let's see if I can play it.
At the same, this is what I will do to defeat anti-Semitism and defend our Jewish citizens in America. My first week back in the Oval Office, my administration will inform every college president that if you do not end anti-Semitic propaganda, they will lose their accreditation and federal taxpayer support.
So Donald Trump's first action is going to be to basically attack the First Amendment. Apparently.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's scary because, you know, I mean, it maybe is a little less scary for me with Trump.
It's terrifying because they're going to use in the same way that they would say, oh, Russian propaganda or Russia influence. He's going to say anti-Semitism. Like we're even going so far as to say, well, calling somebody a Zionist is anti-Semitic. They're going to go like, I get the sense they're going to lean heavily into it.
Yeah, I mean, I am well, I shouldn't say small. I'm partial. I'm like an eighth Jewish, and you know, every time I hear that, it just sounds normal to me. Like I'm like, yes, Israel is an apartheid state that's committing a genocide. Sure, yes, it's nothing to me. And a lot of people that I know who are Jewish are just very, very anti-Israel, like very anti-Israel. It's not even vaguely a mutually exclusive thing. It's absurd. But at the same time, like you said, anti-Semitism, it's the Russia of the Trump side.
Exactly.
It's but also I guess it is the same on the left too. So I don't know. But I will say I worry a little less with Trump, because a lot of the time things that Trump says are bluster. That's the only like silver
Saving
lining
grace.
here. Yes, when Biden or those people say that stuff, like they have an established record of contacting all these social media sites and telling them, you know, we need you to say this, or we need you to say that, or we need to not allow this, or whatever. Whereas Trump, I mean, as much as he is a dick about all that stuff, he doesn't really have the same kind of record. Like when he was in office, he didn't do any of that kind of stuff. He didn't really actually shut people down. And he did say he was going to also. That's the other thing. Like he said he was going to put Hillary in jail. He said he was going to outlaw certain types of things, and they would go to like they would get in trouble for, you know, and he didn't do any of it. I think a lot of it's bluster. Like, I like saying things, I don't like doing things, that type of a thing.
Well, people of policy, and he has put some lunatics in those positions. I mean,
Yes,
but I do love
that's
the Tulsi
true.
Gabbard spot. I love the Tulsi Gabbard position. I even like the RFK position, even though some people have been losing their mind about the RFK thing.
If he actually addresses sugar, like in everything, I'm fine with that. Like, that's the one thing I think that he's concentrating on some dumb things. Like he cares about what artificial ingredients are in Fruit Loops. It's like, no, you need to focus on the sugar, my man.
Well, it depends, right? Because in Europe, there's certain things that they don't even sell here. That ex-girlfriend from Austria was telling Margaret that she would look at the back of the label. She was like, I'm not eating this. And it's like, you realize that that's in 95% of everything in America. Like high fructose corn syrup is everywhere.
Yeah.
They don't put that stuff in their food in Europe. And she was like trying to avoid it, like somebody was trying to dodge, you know, like a dodgeball. And you can't. It's everywhere. It's like the very act of getting ketchup. Okay, it's in that. You want something to drink? It's in that. Like, it's astonishing.
Ketchup. It's in tomato soup. Like tomato soup, which is not really sweet in any way. It's like a salty thing. And it's in that. It's a lot in that too.
Put it in everything.
It's such a bizarre thing.
If I'm not mistaken. Because people recognize the taste of sugar, even if they're not aware that they're eating sugar. Like, but that's what I mean though. Like that stuff is not for our health. That's purely for profit reasons. And I guess if he gets in, is like, yeah, this is now a no. We're not doing this anymore.
Yeah,
I'm okay with that. Like, meaning, because at the very least, for the first time, it feels like there's somebody in that spot that are freaking out the elitists who are in these positions, and who seem to have this kind of focus on corporations are screwing over the American public and screwing over our health. It needs to stop. If that is the basis by which he's operating, God bless him.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think, I mean, I like I said, would I like everything to have natural flavoring in it rather than like other, like unnatural flavoring, I guess is the best way to put it. Right. Yes, I would, but I don't care about that being addressed until he addresses sugar. If he can get sugar down and stuff like that, I was 240 plus pounds, and I started regulating my sugar and just exercising a little bit. I'm at 189 pounds. It's literally in everything. And the only reason I got to that point was just like regulating sugar. That's it. Right. I mean, it takes basically having to find stuff that has fake sugar in it, that doesn't, you know, fake sweetening in it, but because you can't get anything without sugar in it. It's all got sugar. But the same thing with Tulsi Gabbard. I would say with Tulsi, like, I do have some reservations about some of her positions. She's not explicitly like pro-Palestine, etc. But in terms of like you said, with RFK coming from at least their screwing people position, that's a good basis to come from. And Tulsi is kind of similar with the military, as much as like the Democrats try to paint her as very pro-war. She's not. She believes in war if it has an explicit purpose.
But see, I don't even know how they're painting her as pro-war. The Biden, because her main,
because she won't say she's anti-war. It's literally just words.
Pieces of her, but Democrats are anti-war. They're pro-war. Like Kamala Harris derided Donald Trump for even trying to make peace deals. Like he went and made peace deal with North Korea, and Kamala Harris turns that into he's hanging around with dictators. That sounds a lot like Sarah Palin, right? Palling around with dictators. Tulsi Gabbard, her claim to fame was pointing out that Obama was instrumental in trying to overthrow the Assad government and got 500,000 people killed. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe she said that. Well, it's true. It's true. I remember she was on Jake Tapper.
Yeah, it's objectively true.
Yeah, I remember she was on Jake Tapper, and Jake Tapper was like, the government said they didn't do that. And it's like, I don't give a shit what the government said, Jake. It's literally what's happening.
Yeah, it's literally just objectively. It's not an opinion.
Yeah, it's not my point of view. It is literally what happened. And then when Trump came in, if you remember, there were reporting coming out the New York Times pointing out the $1 billion war, the secret war that Obama was running and trying to overthrow the Syrian government. So it's like, okay, so she says we need to stop these foreign engagements and these wars. And they call her, well, she's pro-war. It's like, get the hell out of here. Yeah. The Biden administration has literally been running one war after the next, and it's just escalating.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah, like it blows me away that they get Rachel Maddow. Oh God, man, I've gotten to the point where I've liked these people less and less and less, on to the point of just annoyance. Rachel Maddow came out, called Tulsi Gabbard a Putin plant, that she's a foreign asset. The woman is literally a lieutenant colonel in our military or something, or a lieutenant in a military. Like the way that they talk about her is just mind-blowing to me. And same thing with RFK. They was like, oh, he's a kook. He's a conspiracy theorist. He doesn't believe in vaccines. None of that is true, by the way. Like, it's just astonishing.
Yeah, no, he does. He's vaccinated.
Yeah, he's fully vaccinated.
That's the thing that I think is the funniest thing in the world. His literally main point vaccinated.
Is basically vaccines don't go through the same testing that every other drug has to go through.
Yeah.
And when he says that, people flip out. Oh my God, I can't believe he said that.
They don't, too. Especially the COVID one. I mean, we don't need to get into that, but especially the COVID one.
Yeah, it's true. What he's saying on this was true.
It's just it's not even an opinion. It's not a value judgment. It's these people are just saying things that have happened.
It's like, it's not that it's not true. It's just it's unhelpful in the moment. It's like, get out of here.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
We don't like it.
I didn't get the chance to ask you this before I let you go. How do you think she lost? Because I don't think I've spoken to you since the election.
We spoke on election night before it was called.
Okay, so we didn't get the chance to speak afterwards. Okay. Why do you think she lost? I've asked everybody who's coming on the show that is even halfway political this is the exact same question. I'm super curious about the answer to it. And I remember when I used to be on phone lines, there were certain events where we would bring on every show. So we would get like every host of every show to come on and give a take. And that was fascinating because you have right and left wingers who would get into these fights on the show over these very specific issues. I was always fascinated by this stuff. But from your take, what's your take on how she lost?
Well, my opinion really hasn't changed. A lot of the things that I said on election night are basically my thoughts. Like it's not just her, it's the Democrats. The Democrats have established themselves as the establishment firmly, very, very intensely. We're not populists. Nazism equals populism. The people don't matter. What we say is correct matters. War is great, even though we're the anti-war party. I mean, it's basically just this litany of like issues where they have basically staked out a position that is against what the people of the United States want, and they've done that basically since Obama. They got real cocky with Obama, and they decided, you know what, we don't really have to placate anybody. They're the bad guys, the Republicans are the bad guys, and we're the good guys, and people know that, right? And that's all we got to do. We got to point out how bad the Republicans are, and that's it. We don't need to codify Roe versus Wade. We don't need to pass a functional healthcare system that's competitive with the rest of the world. We don't have to do any of that stuff. They had a super majority. This is when I lost full faith in the Democrats, is when they had a super majority and they passed the Affordable Care Act,
Right.
and not
Obamacare.
some form of public option, because
Right.
that they had a super majority. They could have done whatever they wanted. It doesn't matter what season, if it was lame duck or any of that. They could have gotten up and done anything they wanted. And they didn't codify Roe versus Wade, which is the issue they run on every year before and after Obama. And they didn't give us a functional healthcare system with a public option.
No.
It's just that's the things that they claim to care about, and they don't do it. And when we tell them that they should do it, they call us sexists or racists or any. That's the entire problem. And they did nothing during the course of this this campaign to contradict that. In fact, they made it much, much worse.
I'm glad you put it that way, because over the course, I think it was a few days ago, I came to this conclusion that in their minds, Kamala Harris ran a great race. And I couldn't reconcile it. I was like, what do you mean she ran a great race? Like, are these people just lying, or do they actually mean that? And I think in your framing, if you put yourself in the position of a liberal and you look at the world and you think to yourself, well, Kamala Harris said everything about Trump that I thought. She prosecuted the case against him. She called him a sexual abuser, a criminal, a Nazi, a Hitler. She called him all that stuff. That's exactly what I believe he is. And the fact that she called him those things, well, obviously the American public can't vote for somebody who's like that, missing the fact that the American public doesn't see him the same way. Meaning in their minds, she was okay because of the way she ran her campaign, missing the fact that she offered nothing, not in real terms. Like if you think, like, she literally ran on transnational gangs and Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
And believe that that was going to be something that would either get Republicans or that the amount of Republicans that she would get will compensate for the lefties that she would lose by doing that. And as Margaret said, these are unicorns. These, you know, you might get 3, but 3 is not going to compensate for the what? 8 million people that you lost between Joe Biden and between this election. They seem to be utterly oblivious. It is astonishing to me how weak and impotent this political party is. I mean, the first part of your job is to get elected. And it's stunning to me. Like, I was stunned by the way she ran this campaign. It was as if we were doing them a favor. And that goes back to your other point, where you pointed out kind of like, well, we don't have to do anything because Republicans are that bad. And so, you know, you should be happy that we are even in this race. You should be happy that you even have the right to vote for me. That's what you should be happy about. You should be thanking me for that. And maybe that's why they get so weird when they lose. That's the only party that loses, that blames everybody, that blames voters for their loss. It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
Where do you think they go? Here? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well,
please.
I was going to say it's sort of the platonic elitism. It's this idea they aren't like, they're called the Democrats, but they don't really believe in democracy. They believe that they are the gift to the commoner. Like, they don't see themselves as the party of democracy. Certainly they don't see themselves as that. They kind of disdain democracy. They disdain the idea that somebody could think differently than them. And they want to dictate reality to everybody. To really just go back to my book, I mean, they're funded by all of these billionaires and all of these capitalists to basically dictate reality. They're a large part of that machine. And again, like, Twitter. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I was agreeing with you. MSNBC.
Oh, yeah.
The way the way Kamala Harris was like, yeah, we're going to have to do something about Twitter. Why? Because it's putting out an opinion that disagrees with me, and I don't particularly like the opinion it's putting out. You get John Kerry saying we got to do something about the First Amendment, which is mind-blowing, right? Again, why do you need to do something about the First Amendment? If people agreed with you and you were winning, I would imagine you wouldn't do anything to it. Same thing with Hillary Clinton saying they need to put people in prison for having a difference of opinion to Hillary Clinton. Like,
well, the total control that they need. The total control. Yeah. That comment just absolutely, I was like, how do you not know? How do you not know not to say that? Yeah. How do you not understand that that is a thing that will make everybody just leave the room as fast as possible? Like, it boggles. They're so far up their own asses. They just believe they are superior to everyone else. It's the whole, like, philosopher king, guardian class. I'm better than everybody. Everybody else is just looking at shadows in the cave that I've projected for them. Like, it's literally like the Platonic elitism. Like, they think that it's good. A lot of people think that it's good, to be frank. It's not just a Democrat thing, certainly.
Democrats believe it. I mean, when they're talking to each other, they full believe it. That's why nobody left the room.
Absolutely.
Everything that she said was perfectly acceptable because, you know, all of them are part of the same club and we believe the same things. And so if we need to shut people up, well, obviously they're putting out misinformation. That's why we're shutting them up. And it's like, okay, dude, come on. It's like, come on. They believe it. They believe
it's
it.
crazy. And it's the thing is and the thing is, like, people like myself, like, I voted for Obama in both of Obama elections. The second time, not necessarily because I really believed in him. I didn't want Mitt Romney in. And to be fair, that was, I think, as good of a choice as you could make at that point. It's certainly like, and again, like every election since, it's just been like kind of, well, I would even argue that not that some, like, Obama did have a backbone on a couple of things, not a lot, but some things he did slightly different. Like, he clashed with the State Department with Hillary Clinton and put John Kerry in second one. It's not like John Kerry's a lot better, but is better. Anyway, but sorry, I'm derailing myself.
No, you're fine.
I voted for the Democrats
I voted for Obama twice.
in both those elections. And the thing is I am, after Bush, I mean, I was a teenager when Bush was put in, and kind of like after 9/11, I wasn't necessarily anti-Bush or anything like that because I didn't really understand the situation. Then the aftermath of that, it basically like, wow, the neocons really suck. Let's go the other direction. And if they had simply like worked to appease things and tried to actually make the lives of the American people better, people like myself would probably still be for the Democrats. Like, they could have just continued being marginally better and actually making incremental progress. If they had been doing that since the Bush years, it probably wouldn't have activated all of this like disdain from everybody. But the fact is, like, a lot of people who are in my position who saw the horror of Bush, who voted for Obama twice, and then saw Bernie Sanders get totally shut out of the election. A lot of people, they voted for Trump. I didn't vote for Trump, but like, I know that there's many, many people who are in the exact same like political, like, all of this is bullshit. I cannot see anything that is not bullshit. And they vote for Trump because they hate this crap. It's not because they love Trump. Like, some of them have grown to love Trump for sure, but not all of them. A lot of people like myself, they vote for Trump because they just hate everything that they see in the government. They want to see it all burnt down. And I don't agree with burning everything down. I agree with changing things. But I understand where people
it's angering. I agree with you. I agree with you totally. I voted for Jill Stein. I wrote her in DC. The Democratic Party, from my point of view, you cheated my guy. I'm going to hate you forever for that. Unless
and from their point of view, the things we are saying right now are pro-Trump.
Oh, fair enough. They can think that. I mean, but I haven't, from my point of view, I thought Trump should have been put in jail after the second, when he didn't leave office.
The thing I'm getting at is all of these people who vote for Trump aren't necessarily even pro-Trump. Like, the things that you and I are saying right now are not pro-Trump. I don't think Trump is a good guy. I think there's things that are okay about him. Like, they say palling around with dictators. I say actually trying to prevent war, even if marginally so. I don't love that. Like, I feel like somebody else in that position would probably do a significantly better job of it, but like, just not thinking like the best thing to do is to completely cut off all contact and threaten them out of everything. Like, I mean, and again, like, that would be read as a pro-Trump point from liberals at this point. And it's like, I'm just pointing out that he did something that you guys claim that you are here to do, which is they're supposedly anti-war, while at the same time being clearly the biggest warmongers. Like,
it's like these humanitarian wars. It's like, the bombs turn to flowers and only hit bad people. It's like, get out of here with that nonsense. Peter, man, I always appreciate these conversations, Peter. Thank you for this.
I do too. Thank you.
I hope you get the Alex Jones position. If Onion ends up getting InfoWars, I hope they see that clip and bring you on. I would love to be a guest on that show.
If the Onion gets it, we as of now, the Onion says they're going to get it, but I
don't know.
In my opinion, it's a little shaky sounding based on everything else we've heard now.
Yeah, because it started to unravel like that. Like Alex Jones was doing these little clips of like 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. He was like, "They're coming to get me. The globalists are coming to get me." It's like 14-minute video. Like
I don't think
it was just wild.
What kind of a bid? What kind of a bid that's not the highest bid is the best bid? I don't know.
Right. Right. Those videos.
That was the first one when I saw.
Yeah, that's when I got involved in the story. I was like, okay, what the hell is going on with this? What is
exactly. It's like something's weird here.
Yeah. Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. Their book, Custom Reality and You, explore reality, where profit is the driving force. That is our world. You can follow Peter on YouTube and Twitter at Peter Coffin and purchase their book on Amazon.com. All right. I am going to take a quick break because I have been talking nonstop for the last 2.5 hours. Lawrence Wilkerson is coming up at 9:15. He is going to be here shortly. That is going to be a fantastic conversation to top off a fantastic show up to this point. So you cannot see me because the banner is over my head, so that is not helpful. There we are. That's much better. So he's going to be on at 9:15. So in a very few, he will be on. So I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to get something to drink. I am going to let you listen to the soothing sounds of something, but apparently there are no soothing sounds. At the very least, I don't have anything loaded. All right. I'll do this one. And I will be back. And I think this is a 3-minute one. I'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am the host of this show. I run from Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. If you guys are digging what you are seeing, it seems like we have a lot of new people here today. Give it a like, share the content, share it far and wide to your mama, sister, uncle, whoever you believe may enjoy the content. Share it. Also, as I said, hit the subscribe button. My job or my objective is to grow. We are growing. My objective is to get to 40,000 by the end of the year. I require your help in order to pull that off. So definitely hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I pop in at all times of the day and night, at all times of the week. By the way, I've also added a membership account. And I got to be honest, I wasn't quite sure what to put in the membership account. But one of the things that I am going to do by popular demand is to have a chess night. And I'm going to allow the audience, I guess my members, to challenge the champ at chess night. What I would love to do is to be able to have a tournament of YouTubers. It can even be YouTubers in lefty media, if that's what they wanted to do. I will dominate and destroy any and all channels that contest or come at this particular channel in regards to chess. I am the champion of that, and I will remain the champion of that. 5 minutes and below, come at me, bro, if that is indeed what you want to do. I'm gonna have chess nights. I haven't had one recently, but I used to have them all the time where I would sit there and play blitz in order to get my rating up to a certain point. But that will be something that I will be adding to the channel also. But more than anything else, I just want to thank all of you for making this channel a success and coming back. I've been pleasantly surprised with the amount of goodwill that has been shared since I've been back, and I appreciate it. Deeply so. I really do. So Lawrence will be here in about 4 minutes. But before I get to Lawrence, we've been having this conversation about the way the Democrats have been behaving at the end of the loss. And some of it has been spiteful, telling Hispanics that when Trump comes in and you get deported or your family members get deported, you own all of it. The other one has been aimed at either Arabs or Muslims. And these are the ones that are particularly disgusting. Various degenerates in the Democratic Party and liberals have been very upset with the fact that Kamala Harris lost, and they have not been able to fathom why. And so instead of looking at the Democratic Party and pointing the finger and blaming the party that spent $1 billion in 3 months and lost, they point the finger to everybody else. So it's blacks' fault. It's Hispanics' fault. It's Muslims' fault. It's Arabs' fault. Everybody's fault but their own. They can't reconcile it. And so they have been saying some pretty disgusting things. One of the disgusting things that came out was this. Think about how much of a degenerate you have to be to put something like this out. This was one of the bombings that took place in Beirut. Bombing in broad daylight in a civilian area, killing people left and right, which is something that the Biden administration has supported, paid for, given political cover to, lied to the American public about for the last year. Full stop. The reason that the Arab vote didn't go for Joe Biden was because Joe Biden was killing those same Arabs, or for that matter, those same Muslims, and was doing it for over a year and paying 70% of the costs for all of those rivers of blood that Joe Biden was creating. So this notion that they didn't vote for the person supporting the genocide, well, that's common sense. But the Democratic Party doesn't take it that way. Yeah, Joe Biden was doing the genocide, but you still should have voted for him anyway. This was one of the comments. LMAO, this is what y'all get. Y'all voted for this. Remember that. Think about that. Think about what the person is saying. That these Arabs deserve this because they voted for Trump. What the tweeter doesn't know or doesn't seem to realize is that Joe Biden is the one that's still in office. All of this is happening under Joe Biden. Those people voted for Trump for the exact reason that this post is pointing out, that this is happening under Joe Biden. This degenerate idiot apparently either didn't know that or wasn't thinking about that when she was exhibiting the amount of joy at people being slaughtered. This is your Democratic Party. This is your Democratic Party. And this is precisely why those Arabs, those Muslims, and people without a conscience or with a conscience decide not to vote for that candidate. Utterly and completely disgusting. One of the other interesting things that are going on is Mayor Adams. Mayor Adams apparently has no F's to give anymore. And he has just been saying the quiet part out loud. But we'll get to that after. My guest is here. Yes, excellent. I would like to introduce and to bring in somebody that I have followed for a while now, and he has my deep appreciation for joining me, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Thank you, man, for joining me. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay. I hope you are too.
I am doing great. Better that you're joining me. And just to give you a bio, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, he is a distinguished visiting professor of government and public policy at College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught for 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known as the retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff for the United States Secretary of State, Colin Powell. Man, you have no idea how much I appreciate you joining me on this show. Thank you for this.
Good to be with you.
I am going to start off at the very beginning, considering what the news that have been passed down over the weekend with Joe Biden approving missile strikes or long-range missile strikes into Russia proper. And of course, the reason this is a big deal is because Putin has already pointed out that this is a red line and that doing this will mean that Russia is at war with NATO and that they will find ways to respond, whether that's, hey, Houthis, here's a hypersonic bomb, have fun, or whether that's assisting in elements either in Syria or in the Middle East, we don't know. But they made it very clear this was a red line. Why do you think Joe Biden is doing this? Give me your take on this.
I hate to say it, but I've known Joe Biden long enough to know that one of his most disturbing characteristics when he is angry is spite. He's a very spiteful man when he gets angry. You may recall his words at the hearings when Anita Hill was testifying, and he's in the other party. He's a Democrat, and she, of course, was representing H.W. Bush's nomination for the Supreme Court, and Biden just treated her like she was dirt, and I think that was a reflection. Personality reflection, if you will, of this kind of spite. Now he's feeling real spite because, one, he was eliminated by his arch rival, if you will, Barack Obama, is what I'm told, who made the major, vote breaking recommendation that he stepped down in favor of his vice president, which really angered him. Again, I'm told, I wasn't there, but it fits my picture of Joe Biden's character. And he's been angry ever since. And he's also angry that the Democrats lost and that any implication for that loss might adhere to him for the wars in Ukraine, the unparalleled support for the genocide in Gaza, and other things that really turned a lot of people off, particularly progressives who probably refused to even vote. So he's in a mood to leave Trump with a legacy that Trump will find very difficult to deal with. And he's also trying to, I think, seal the deal, if you will, with Zelensky and Ukraine so that Trump will find it extremely difficult to get out. After all, if Putin attacks a NATO country or NATO countries, then all bets are off. Then we're in a war, however stupid and unwise it is, we're in a war alongside other NATO countries against Russia. So these are all things that probably impacted his decision. And meanwhile, he's down in Brazil, in the rainforest, declaring things. If I were President Lula, I would have arrested him as a war criminal and presented him to the International Criminal Court and told them, over to you, justice.
It's astonishing to me that that level of spite allows Joe Biden to potentially risk a third world war. I mean, because either one of a few things is true. Either he believes Putin is bluffing, which I don't know why you would think Putin is bluffing at this point. I mean, they've been in a war, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Bluffing is not really something I think would happen at this point. Or he wants to, as you said, ingratiate the U.S. even further into a war to make it that much more difficult for Trump to extricate himself from it. That just seems very, to call it risky is an understatement. I I guess from my point of view, what do you think the Pentagon is saying on this? Because the Pentagon had disagreed with this premise. From their point of view, you're not going to really get anything out of it, but you're risking an uncontrolled war, or for that matter, unpredictable consequences for doing so. So it's like, it's not much juice out of that orange. And yet it seems that the president is pushing for it anyway. Give me a take on how you think this is going to be received. I mean, how do you think Putin is going to resolve or deal with this?
Well, this Pentagon, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, C.Q. Brown, Air Force General C.Q. Brown, and Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, of course, have been the brake on our war in Ukraine, if you will. They've been very much the brake, and I don't think this is going to make them happy at all. In fact, I suspect they're pondering what this means at the Pentagon. And they're probably on the line. Lloyd Austin has a pretty good line into his equivalent in Russia. So he's probably talking to him. Thank God we've got someone who essentially evades Biden's order that no one of his cabinet talk to Russia. He's probably talking to them, and he's trying to calm the waters a bit. Now, Putin has been very circumspect and very prudent. I just listened a moment ago to his latest remarks. And he was very circumspect. He was very prudent, but he was very, very definitive too, declarative, if you will, about this being an escalation, a sure escalation, if it were to happen. Putin has at his beck and call missiles that are the equivalent of nuclear weapons, but without the fallout. He has some missiles, the Avant-Garde series, for example, even the Iskander series, that have such colossal warheads on them. And in the case of the Avant-Garde, move at 33,000 kilometers per hour. That's about 19,000 miles an hour. That's a fast missile. There's no way anyone in the world can shoot it down. And when it hits with that speed and the size of its conventional warhead, it has the impact on the ground of a small yield nuclear weapon without the radioactivity. So he's already shot one of those, you may recall. He shot it at that facility that was deep inside Ukraine that had a lot of people from NATO in it training Ukraine.
That's right.
Yeah, those were the first bodies the Swiss had shipped home in body bags in decades, if not a century. So it was a real shock for the Swiss. I'm not the Swiss, the Swedish.
Yeah.
Thank God the Swiss are smart enough not to be in there. So that was, we could do that on a more wholesale basis and devastate Ukraine, particularly Kyiv, if he wanted to. Probably take out Zelensky and his whole government if he wanted to. So I would think he would probably move to that next rather than nuclear weapons, but there's always the possibility, and that's a very dangerous possibility.
Let me ask you this. I've asked people who've come onto the show, what was this for? And the reason I ask this question is I find this to be so unnecessary as a war. I mean, if you think about it, there were the Minsk agreements. NATO expanded literally to the border of Russia at this point, knocks over the government of Ukraine. All of these things are hostile actions. There were Minsk agreements 1 and 2. There were Istanbul agreements that were blown off. The Minsk agreements, you had Angela Merkel coming out basically saying we lied. And so an agreement that was supposedly used to end a conflict was effectively used to provoke one, to allow Ukraine to build up this massive military. And I think of all these people that have lost their lives, and this war at some point is going to come to an end. Ukraine is clearly going to lose the war. And I think at some point, someone is going to have to ask the question, either in the United States or Ukraine, what was this for? And so I'm asking you, and I don't mean like we are stopping Putin from, using 150,000 troops to take all of Europe. I don't mean that. The U.S. clearly had some kind of geopolitical strategic reason for doing this. What was it for?
I think there were 3 reasons for what we did in Ukraine, and you've just described it rather well. I'm not excusing Putin's violation of an international border in any way, but I am saying he had more than adequate provocation to do so, and we gave him that provocation. The first and most important strategic reason for the United States, and this is the neoconservatives who fostered this reason, is to bleed Russia, because they felt Russia stood in their way of bleeding China. And they've gotten their wish in reverse, because what they did, of course, was force Moscow and Beijing into a tacit alliance of sorts. So that failed majorly. The second reason was to make money for Lockheed Martin and all the other defense contractors who, believe me, have made a fortune off this war and off Gaza. So much of a fortune that they don't even have to have their CEOs buy their stocks back now in order to drive the prices up, because the market is just reacting to the fact that their profits are obscene off of this war. And there are other people who made money too. And then the third reason, and I even can see some validity to this reason, but it's third and not the paramount reason, was to stop China from doing what it wished to do with regard to its base road initiative in Europe. And what that was they have now, most people don't even know this. I've found only 3 people I've talked to in the last year that even were aware of this. China has built a rail network that debouches into Europe that takes 16 hours to get the produce from its Pacific ports into the heart of Europe, if it's allowed to function. That reduces their shipping time, if you will, which was overseas before through the Red Sea or through the Straits or whatever, by about 3 days. It's a monumental increase in ability to flood Europe with Chinese products. It takes about 16 hours on this rail. Well, that's been halted by this war, and China's turning Ukraine into an entrepot for Europe through which it funnels all of its goods into Europe, has been halted. So that was another strategic reason. I think that was, as I said, the lesser strategic reason, but one that sort of made some sense, but you could have done it in other ways.
Yeah.
You could have done it by asking Germany, for example, to help you, because they would be the formidable power in that regard at the time. Now, what we've done by blowing up Nord Stream pipeline, we've caused Germany to go from being one of the finest manufacturing countries in the world to being a basket case.
Yep.
And they're just now realizing that, which is why the government's going to change forthwith. But those are the reasons, basically.
Would Nord Stream factor into that also? I mean, Blinken, if I'm not mistaken, wrote the book on pipeline wars, where they complained about that pipeline for years because they didn't necessarily like the connection between Russia and Germany. And to be honest, the fact that the pipeline exists at all kind of shows all of this stuff to be somewhat of a fraud. If Germany really believed that Russia was a threat, that all of these people are saying it was, they would have never had the pipeline. They would have never invested in it. But they needed the energy and everything else. But it didn't seem like the U.S. approved of that pipeline because of the connections between Russia and Germany. Was that part of I guess what I'm asking is, was the pipeline gravy on top, or was it part of the main objectives in regards to the conflict?
I think it was part of the main objectives. It was an act of terrorism, in my view, and under international law, it should be condemned. People should be held accountable. Of course, they won't be. But it also had, I listed 3 reasons. There's an overall economic reason for Ukraine and for the wider array of things we're doing to Europe, like bringing so many countries into NATO. Mm-hmm. And that reason is to reestablish our economic hegemony over Europe. It was slipping. And Germany was one of the powers taking it away from us, France to a lesser extent, but Germany majorly. I mean, they were in many respects, they were the first manufacturing country in the world, even outdoing China in terms of the skill and talent of their workforce and the productivity of that workforce. So Germany was a colossal threat to us in terms of productive capacity and economic might, and would only have gotten worse over time vis-a-vis us. So we had to reestablish our economic hegemony over Europe, and what better way than to bring them to their knees in our war?
Yeah, and we've deindustrialized one of our quote unquote allies. I remember Macron coming out asking the US, saying, hey, aren't we all in this together? Because they were paying 5 times more for energy than what they were paying at first, and it was eating into their industries.
Right. Plus, it's the gas, principally the gas methane is what it really is, that replaced the methane from Russia. is a lot dirtier too,
Right.
more expensive and dirtier.
Just
So they got
insane.
two curses.
I just can't, like, it shocked me that they would allow their own societies to take a hit like that. Like Annalena Baerbock coming out saying, I don't care what the Germans want. We're going to support this war. And even coming out with this kind of honest assessment that, yeah, we had to, cut into our rail networks. We had to cut into our healthcare spending in order to give money to Ukraine. And I think to myself, that is outrageous. Like the idea that you would say that aloud is pretty shocking to me, but it gets across what was taking place in real terms in regards to what they were willing to give up on their local societies in order to fund and push this war. It's just astonishing to me. I'm curious on something else. From you have been in the room when, let's say, either wars or this kind of conversation about wars were taking place. Donald Trump has effectively said, I'm going to end this war. I'm going to end this war. He has made it one of his main campaign, let's say, thrust of his campaign speech. And I guess the question breaks down into two parts. Is it possible that what Joe Biden is doing is escalating in order to provoke some kind of crisis where he believes he'll be able to solve before Trump gets in office? I guess that's the first question. And I'll ask the second afterwards. But I'm curious on that front. Do you think this escalation is a larger plan at work with the idea of, I'm going to solve this now before Donald Trump gets in office and comes up with his own deal, and I'm going to do this by escalating in order to provoke a crisis? Or not so much? This is just Joe Biden being spiteful.
I think there may be some element of that to it, but it's insane from the perspective of the time remaining that anyone would conceive strategically, geopolitically, that this could be solved by the time Donald Trump takes the oath of office. It is not going to be solved. If it's going to be solved in a decisive way, it's going to be solved by Putin taking the gloves off. Right now, what you have in Ukraine is some very brave people who have been cut down to almost nothing, who are dying at numbers that are catastrophic. Manpower is the big issue in Ukraine right now, and Russia tops Ukraine by a factor of 10 or 12 to 1 in that regard. Artillery is the next factor, and Russia tops Ukraine about 50 to 1 in that regard, regardless of anything we might furnish them. They simply don't have the people and the artillery tubes to fire those artillery rounds as fast as the Russians can. So it's a disaster right now for the Ukrainians. And for that reason alone, sane people should stop this conflict, because we're just killing people for nothing.
Well, will the attack items make a difference? I mean, if Joe Biden is basically allowing these long-range strikes, would that make any difference on the battlefield? Is this a wonder weapon, as they call it?
The pressure, especially from around Moscow on Putin, is not pressure to end the conflict. It's pressure to end the conflict decisively on Russian terms.
Right.
And so this will anger that group in Moscow that has considerable power, that is putting pressure on Putin to end it quickly and get it over with. So, that's every invitation for Putin to push harder and to go at least conventionally, the way I described earlier with the Avard system, or go nuclear.
Do you believe that Trump is going to end the war in the way he says he's going to end it?
I do. I think he's going to have a lot more trouble than he thinks, because he's the man of the deal. He's a transactional man, if nothing else.
Right.
And when he finds what Putin's deal, such as it is going to be, is at the negotiating table, he's going to be very difficult to deal with, and Putin is not going to tolerate that very long. And what I mean is, Putin is going to be very, very reluctant, even is not going to at all fall off the fact that he is going to invest all of the Russian-speaking provinces of Ukraine, and he is going to want to keep those, just as he wants to keep Crimea. Now, I think Trump could say, he has said, Crimea is yours. We're not disputing that. But it's going to be tough for any American president, and particularly Trump, to go to negotiations or have someone for him go to negotiations and have Putin act like that. because Trump is going to want to say afterwards, I got the deal. I got the deal. And he's going to have a hard time doing that with Putin.
Well, considering facts on the ground as they are, I don't know. Let me ask you this. What could Trump do? I mean, does Trump really have any assets in that region where he would be able to influence one way or the other in the context of a deal? I mean, because it seems like everything has been put on the field at this point. Russia's been going through NATO equipment like butter over the last several months. What could he do? It seems like it's a fait accompli on some level. If Trump negotiates, it seems like it's a loss either way, that Trump doesn't necessarily have any, let's say, feather in his cap, short of going to some kind of nuclear conflict where we're directly engaged, that could change the context of that negotiation in any particular way. But correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, I think he has some leverage. And I think the leverage is the weariness of Putin for this conflict. And the weariness, to a certain extent, of other Russians who aren't in that group that I just described to you. And you might add the weariness of people being conscripted from all over Russia, because he's not drafting people from the Moscow area. He knows that would be very, very difficult to do. Just as Zelensky's not drafting people from the Kiev area. They won't serve. They're the sons and daughters of the nomenclatura, if you will, the cognoscenti, the high-ranking, high-moneyed people around Kiev. They won't let their sons and daughters serve. And that's causing Zelensky some problem, too. But it's causing Putin a problem in Russia, and he's going to run out of recruits from the hinterland, so to speak. So there are pressures that if Trump recognizes them and uses them subtly, or his negotiator does, they can come to a deal. I would love to be the negotiator myself, love to, because I think I know the points that we could agree on and the points that we would disagree on. And I think I know how to manage those latter. But
go into that for me. Step into
is he
it.
going to have someone who can do that?
Well, that's what's going to step into it for me. What other points that we agree on? And what other points? Well, obviously, let's start with that. What other points that we agree on that you believe can mend fences where both, because at the end of the day, in agreements, usually both sides want to walk out saying, I got this. Basically a face-saving mechanism for each side. What would that be?
Actually, I learned at State, I think, and I learned this lesson in the Pentagon too, because the Pentagon does more diplomacy than State does. That's the reality of America and the empire. Military officers do more diplomacy than any foreign service officer. So I learned in both places that the best negotiations in a complex situation like this come out in a lose-lose, not a win-win. That is to say, you lose, he loses, but you both recognize there's no other outcome. And you minimize the loss on both sides. That's what this is going to take. One of the things that we can come in and admit to immediately is what I just described. Crimea is yours. We're not contesting that. Second thing we can recognize is you get the territory that you currently occupy. Now we'll argue over how long you get it for. Do you get it in perpetuity, or do you get it for 10 years, and do we hold referenda during that time in which at least 55% of the people have to vote for affiliation with Russia, affiliation with Kiev, or neutrality? All three of those options would be open. And then the next point that's going to be a bone of contention is you, the American president, have to be willing to eventually renounce any prospect of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. And the alternative to that, the alternative to that is what I said 6 years ago about Ukraine, even back when Powell was Secretary of State: neutrality. That state begs, as Switzerland does, a position, geopolitical position of neutrality. It should be neutral. It is too dangerously placed in the heart of Europe. It needs, and it's too big, and it's too rich potentially. It needs to be neutral. It should be neutral. So you have to come to some kind of conclusion about that. But the key factor with Putin is going to be not a member of NATO, not even 20 years down the road, because he doesn't trust us. He doesn't trust us. He thinks we're duplicitous with good reason. He thinks we're liars with good reason. And so he doesn't trust us. So each thing that you negotiate has to be something that he can feel. in his hand that's real. It can't be something that's based on our word, because he knows our word is worthless.
Yeah, he has to be able to validate it in some way, especially after the Minsk agreements, where it
Yes.
was basically lied to. I'm curious on something else. If Trump does come in, and if Trump does want to end the war, let's take him at his word for the moment. There are going to be people who fundamentally disagree with this, right? Like the blob, as they call it. There are going to be elements of it that disagree with the president's policies. And just like in the last time Trump was in office, where I believe it was Afghanistan policy or Syrian policy, where the generals basically ignored Trump's orders on that. How you've seen this kind of mechanism at work? What are the forces? Is it possible for one man, even if it's the president, to do that, to take to change the orthodoxy, especially around a war that has been going on for the last 3 years that everybody seems to be thoroughly invested in? Is it possible for Trump to do that on his own? And what will be kind of the forces pushing back against him as he tries to do this?
My quick answer is no, it's not possible, and particularly not possible because you are appointing, apparently, as your prime cabinet officers, neoconservatives.
Right.
The most prominent of which are Pete Hegseth at Defense and Marco Rubio at State. They are both arch neoconservatives. So you're going to be fighting Rubio from the perspective of his desire to be president, to follow you and be president, and the things he's going to do as Secretary of State to, grease the road for that, and his neoconservatism. He wants a war with every country in Latin America, from Venezuela to Argentina. He wants a war with them. He wants to replace Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. He wants to replace Maduro in Venezuela. He wants to sweep the slate clean in Latin America. So he's going to be operating against you all along. And then Pete Hegseth, an unknown
that brings
factor.
up a whole nother question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that brings up a whole nother question then. If Donald Trump goes in and says, I'm going to end wars, not make them, then what does this cabinet tell you about if people are policy? What does this cabinet tell you about the policy that's coming up? I mean, especially if you believe that he's going to try to end the war in Ukraine, wouldn't the people that he's selecting indicate something else?
Tulsi Gabbard is the only member of his administration that seems to be anti-war,
right?
And smart, except with her remarks about Israel. There, she troubles me greatly because she's in for a penny, in for a pound with Bibi Netanyahu, the mass murderer. But everyone else that he's put out so far is either a warmonger or a potential warmonger. Now, let me hasten to add, I don't think a single one of the currently announced cabinet officers will be in office 9 to 10 months down the road. I think he will fire them all.
Now, you think he's going to fire all of them?
Absolutely.
Well, but why choose them if he's going to fire them later? Like, meaning, go for it.
He owes a certain debt to the Republican Party, not much, but a certain debt. And he's got to have, now that they own both houses of Congress, he's got to have some cooperation from them. So he's playing the game of these guys like Getz, and I owe this to Getz. I don't even think Getz will get confirmed. And I think Trump knows that. These guys like Rubio, so I'm paying them. These guys like Hegseth, so I'm paying them. And that's what he's doing, but he'll get rid of them within a year.
It feels like it's an Israel first government. I mean, Miriam Adelson gives them, well, supposedly $100 million. Apparently she only gave them 30 or 40 million.
Yeah.
But, Trump wants to, and just to transition just for a little bit. When Trump was in the first time around, Trump was able to isolate Iran and North Korea. Okay, but that's off the table at this point. Iran is not isolated anymore. Saudi Arabia and Iran have, at the very least, are not at each other's throats in the way that they were before, and both are under this kind of model of the BRICS, even if Saudi Arabia is not necessarily a full-fledged member. North Korea is in association with Russia from the standpoint of a security agreement. Iran would be in a security agreement with Russia at a certain point. So even if I accept that Donald Trump wants to come in and eliminate, let's say, hostilities with Russia, the pressure campaign against Iran, I don't know what that looks like when he comes in office, especially considering 90% of Iran's oil goes to China. How do you think that looks? How do you think, like, and I mean in real world terms, is that a war? Is that a pressure campaign? But I don't even know what a pressure campaign looks in that context when he doesn't necessarily have all of these states together in the way that they were the first time around, especially considering that all of these places at this point are angry at Israel. What does this look like when he comes in office in regard to the Middle East?
I don't know how he's going to square his affection, and that's the best term I can use, for Israel.
No.
And his debt to Israel and debt to Miriam, even though she only gave him 30 million, and his desire not to have a war with Iran, because I think it's a genuine desire on Trump's part. I think he lines up with the current Pentagon in that regard. He does not want a war with Iran. But as you've pointed out, it's going to be extremely difficult. And let me just say that not only does China get lots of its oil from Iran, it gets lots of its oil from the Strait of Hormuz. Right. It is the greatest benefactor of oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. So they are a tacit ally of Iran too, if it looks like that oil flow is threatened. And don't you doubt that for a minute. The Chinese will be right there with the Russians supporting the Iranians if anybody formidable attacks them. Guarantee you. It's all about oil. So I don't know how he's going to square that. I would not want that challenge on my desk. That's a hell of a challenge, unless he just decides he wants to shut down Israel's wars too, and then calms the water, so to speak.
What concerns you most when you look at the world today? Like, meaning, if you had to pick one, either a flashpoint or some kind of strategic, well, not strategic, that's not the right word for it, but a flashpoint or something that is going on in the world that gives you the most concern. It could be pretty much, it could be domestic or international.
Well, there are two things that truly bother me at this end of my life. I'll be 80 next month. And the one is that we, the United States, the American empire, have dismantled on purpose every single nuclear weapons treaty in the world, every single one of them. And we did that so that we could spend over $1.5 trillion in the next decade or so. And Obama, in his nuclear posture statement, started this to modernize, suretize, and securitize, we call it, our nuclear weapon stockpile, so we can take on not only Russia, but also China in combination. That's what we're building out to do. This is extremely dangerous. We're courting a new nuclear arms race, and we're courting nuclear war. And the second thing that truly troubles me, and I'm not even talking about the climate crisis, we are in such colossal debt right now that about the only way we could have even a fathom of hope in getting out of it in a way that is successful for our imperial designs is a huge war. And we did that to a certain extent in World War I, and we did that to a certain extent in World War II. We did it aggressively in World War II. We did it on the sly in World War I. We loaned everybody money that they had to pay back to us at incredible interest rates. And we became very, very wealthy, thank you very much. And Britain and France became very, very poor, thank you very much, not to mention Germany. World War II, of course, we came out of it top of the world. 51% of the world's GDP, all of our competitors at our feet, broken, torn apart, including the Soviet Union, Japan, Germany, Britain. So since that time, we have genuinely been really the world hegemon, certainly even counting the Soviet Union, because they never were as strong as everybody said they were. We just did that to keep our budgets up. Now we are busted. We are $50.2 trillion in aggregate debt in 11 years, according to the CBO. We're $30 trillion right now. If you sold every hard asset in America, bridges, buildings, roads, everything that's hard and could be valued, you would only get about 50 trillion. So we owe our country. We owe our country. Our GDP percentage debt is 120% of GDP. We have never been at this point, except in war. Never. And I don't know how we correct it, because we aren't going to win this, quote, war, unquote. We simply aren't. They're going to beat us eventually, because the world is moving right now. BRICS is the manifestation of it, to balance us, and they're sick of us. BRICS combined GDP is $60.2 trillion. They are going to stomp us, and we are going to be stomped internally by the fact that we owe so much money that when they come up with an alternative method of paying their debts and their costs, which they are doing, we're going to find ourselves holding a currency that is also bankrupt. So those things really worry me.
That is a fascinating point. And I guess this will be the last question. Vladimir Putin was given a speech. And in that speech, he kind of mentioned this notion of like the strategic aims of the dollar. And he pointed out that the US is making money out of thin air. And that, you know, if you have like $10 trillion that are just spun into existence, imagine what you could do with $10 million, $10 trillion. Like you could use that money for anything if you could just make it out of thin air. And that was the point that he was kind of making. He was like, you know, they've been able to use the reserve currency in a way where they've been able to advantage themselves to the tune of trillions of dollars that a normal country wouldn't necessarily be able to do. And part of the BRICS thought process was that the moment that you get countries where they can have deals done in their own reserve currency, you're no longer stuck with that liability of the dollar. It can't be used as a weapon. It can't hit you. But it also means that the dollar, those dollars are now back at home without basically, it becomes inflationary. All of this money, the rest of the world is no longer using. So even it may have the reserve currency, at this point it's down to 50%. At one point it was at 70%. Okay, what does that look like at 30% when many of these countries around the world just come together and say, okay, well, we're using our own currency for the majority of these deals. We collapse. Meaning those are like, I guess what I'm pointing out, you're absolutely right. There's a strategic edge to the way that we use money and the way we use our dollar. And the rest of the world is coming together, realizing it, and it's trying to find a way to basically avoid it because of the way we've used it as a weapon going forward. I guess they don't know that though. Like certainly the Democratic Party didn't bring up BRICS once. And I remember Trump at the very least had some awareness of it where he pointed out, hey, it looks like those countries are coming together against us. And he points it out in the context of sanctions, saying, I'm going to get rid of these sanctions. It's hurting the dollar. It's hurting the dollar. And even going so far as to say he's going to go after countries that are de-dollarizing, which is just going to hasten the downpour, the spiral on that. Do you have any hope or any sort of, I guess, impression that this changes, that we turn a corner in this country? I don't see it. And I guess I'm wondering, you've been around this on this planet longer than I have. You've seen upheavals and downturns in regards to this country. Do you see an out for this? Do you see a corner that we're going to turn on this issue?
First, let me say you just answered your own question better than I can with your explanation of what's going on. And no, I don't, you know, the history, the 3,000 years that we know about with some detail of empires, from the very beginning to the Eastern and Western Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Mughal, the Mongol, the Ottoman, the British, on whom the sun never set. At the end, they all went bankrupt. They all went bankrupt. And they did so in various ways, usually through overextension and wars and things like that. But we're doing it in a unique sort of way, and we're doing it with the most incredible technological development in human history, nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we will go quietly into that dark night. We may start the nuclear war ourselves, because what you just described is going to happen with such a vengeance and so quickly that the American people will be stunned, and so will the leadership. And we'll look for somebody to start the war with to save ourselves.
Is this just hubris? Like, I when I look at these people and the things that they say and do, unprovoked war in Ukraine, it's like, okay, well, that's just dishonest. They have to clearly know that that's dishonest. Putin is going to take all of Europe. And when Putin comes out and says, I need security guarantees, you're effectively surrounding me. I need security guarantees. And nobody would do or work with him at all. It was weird. All of them came out and effectively said, Russia doesn't get security guarantees. You don't get to say that. Is it because the fall of the Soviet Union and the US just looked at it like all of these mini Fukuyamas? Well, we clearly just won this. And because we won, you don't really get to tell us your concerns, where it takes this kind of test of strength in order to say, oh, okay, we do need to pay attention to their concerns. Is this just hubris from the leaders in Europe and the US, or is something else going on with this? And this will be the last question.
No, I think it is hubris and arrogance, but it's a hubris and arrogance brought about by some of the things you just described, the most potent of which I think is the fact that we thought they were done. We thought they were toast. And when we try to put a fork in them, as it were, they weren't.
They weren't done.
And so psychologically speaking, we're reeling from our own mistake, our own misjudgment, our own miscalculation. And that is probably one of the most dangerous things that can happen to empire. You look at the Persian, for example, which many historians would say was the most powerful empire in human history, and how they went out. And you say, well, that was all about hubris. It was all about thinking that they could not be defeated, thinking that their armies were impregnable, invincible, and so forth. And remember, they went up to the Greeks, and the little Greeks handed them a defeat. And of course, Alexander handed them lots of subsequent defeats. So you get to that point where the hubris just outweighs reasonable thinking, and certainly it outweighs wisdom. And we reached the apex of that with Joe Biden.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I can't tell if when William Burns made the memo, "Net means net," and he very clearly, very prescient, spelled all of this out.
Niet means no. Niet
means net. That's right. No means no. And like when you read the document, you think to yourself, okay, this is so clearly explained, and yet they ran headlong into it. And I can't tell whether they ran headlong into it on purpose with the idea of creating a Hobbes choice. Basically, either you allow us to militarily surround you, or you take military action where we try to destroy your economy and try to destroy your military. Or they sleptwalk into it, kind of like in the First World War. I can't tell which one it is.
I think it's more of the former. I don't think we sleptwalk into this. I think we created it.
Ran into it.
Yeah.
Colonel, man, thank you for this. I deeply appreciate it. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He is Distinguished Visiting Professor of Government and Public Policy at the College of William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught 6 years at the University Honors Program at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., right here. He also, and is probably best known as retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff for U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal.
All right. We have come to the end of the road, or at the very least, the end of the show. Let's get these chats in. And first, let's fix my banner. Where's my banner? Where's my banner? Okay, where's my banner? Something's wrong. I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix something. Oh, there we are. All right. And this. There we are. Sparky. Tell Trump to hire Brown University Mark Blythe for Treasury Secretary. Blythe knows austerity for the masses impedes economic recovery. He saw how it was a disaster in the European Union. Blythe is awesome, but he is Irish, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think he's an American. I could be wrong, but I thought he was from Ireland. Fact check me on that. Fact check me. I could be wrong. The disturbing thing about Trump picking Hegeseth isn't that Hegeseth is another Christian Zionist eschatologist, I can't pronounce that word, bent on accelerating the apocalypse, but it shows Trump gets his intel from watching MSM TV. Let's just say that's one of the negatives. I mean, look, man, I don't want religious maniacs holding positions where a clear point of view is necessary. But like what's her name said, like Margaret Kimberly said, is there really any defense secretary that you looked at and thought, yes, that's a great pick? If anything, it's, you know, it's a negative picking of straws. It just so happened that Hegeseth seems to be radically unqualified and mentally not altogether there in order to have a position that requires a certain amount of clarity and vision. So yeah, Sparky, I agree with you. But I think both are problematic. Tell Trump that traditional TV news nowadays is pretend. It's like pro wrestling. It may be entertaining, but it's dangerous. It's banked on otherwise taken seriously. Look, I don't know if Trump takes mainstream media seriously, to be honest. I mean, think about the stories that came out about Trump and think how often those stories came out. I mean, Trump is the one that came up with the fake news. Like, that's fake news. That's fake news. So I suspect that he's going to be somewhat skeptical of news, but the rub is, where's the floor if you're skeptical of news? Like, if you pick up the New York Times and you think the New York Times is trash, okay, fair enough. Then what's not trash? And at what point do you say, okay, this is the floor. This is what's true. This is what's real, as opposed to something that's not? It's not always the easiest thing in the world. You're almost stuck with this notion of trying to pick and choose based upon other things that are around you in order to consolidate whether or not a story is true or false. It's not that easy. I mean, I follow news all around the world, and it's like you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what's most likely to be true? I'll give an example. Elon Musk meeting with the Iranians. Okay, well, that came out in the mainstream media. It came out a few days after the fact that it didn't happen. At the very least, the Iranians said it didn't happen. This follows the story with Trump supposedly putting out these plans on having a conversation with Putin, where Russia and Ukraine said it didn't happen. And then the catch becomes, okay, why are they doing this? Like, who is A, putting out these stories, and B, what is the point of these stories? And the first thought that I had for the Trump thing was, what if somebody on the Trump team did put out that story? Meaning, no, the conversation didn't take place, but the story was put out almost knowing full well that that story was going to go around the world, and that the very fact of the story going around the world and the details of that story as it went around the world had value for whoever put it out. And maybe the value was a heads up of, hey, I want to make a deal. By the same token, this is going to be a negotiated deal. I'm not going to take anything that I get. Meaning, if you don't have the conversation with Putin, but you put it out in the media as if you did to get across what you wanted to say in the conversation, is it, you're not really having a conversation with him, but don't you get your same point across, even if you don't talk to him at the point where the mainstream media reports the story? I gotta be honest, I don't know. I mean, even the Elon Musk thing, it's like, okay, well, why would a story come out about Musk talking to somebody from the Iranian side? And is that something similar as the first case, where someone lies to media in order to put a story out, knowing full well that the story is going to get to the person who you intended to get to? I honestly, I don't know. It's just super bizarre that all of these stories have been coming out that way. I was even somewhat skeptical of the Biden thing. Not skeptical of it, but the White House had not come out to confirm. But the fact that the White House hasn't come out to deny makes it clear that the story is most likely true. Otherwise, they would have came out pretty quickly. William A3R, looks like what happened to InfoWars and TikTok almost the same way. The United States government can't directly shut these companies down, but if they're in violation of the First Amendment, the court system is the workaround. William agreed. And that's exactly what they were doing. So they were doing it in two ways. Three ways, actually. In one way, they would say, okay, we are not shutting it down. We are going to the company and we're asking them to take this down. We don't like what you're saying about Ukraine. We don't like what you're saying about the vaccine. We don't like what you're saying about the administration, Kamala Harris. Take your pick on whatever liberal thing that they don't particularly like you saying something about. And TikTok, or for that matter, Twitter, or for that matter, YouTube, or for that matter, Facebook, may say, okay, we'll take these things down. Or they may say, we'll shadow ban this particular content to make sure that other people can't necessarily see it all that much. Hey, maybe we'll shadow ban this account to make sure this account doesn't quite bubble up in the way that it would typically bubble up. Meaning, they would argue, well, we didn't force the company to do anything. We just politely asked them to do it. And they were willing to do so. And when you look at their Twitter files, I mean, they were in constant communication about stuff that they didn't particularly like and things that they wanted to remove. Just outrageous. So, you know, that is the government directly getting involved in, but using fig leaf of a corporation that, well, it's a private company. It can do whatever it wants. We just ask it to take it down. So there's that taking place. And I would argue that's why they were so angry at Elon Musk. The other way to do it is, like you're saying, through the court system or through amendments. So they would say, we're passing sanctions on this entity. Okay, so now that entity can't function in the United States because sanctions have been passed on the entity. And despite the fact that this is a horrible First Amendment violation, they would say, well, we didn't do anything to impugn the speech of the company. We just shut the entire network down. So there's that. From the standpoint of courts, the courts initially came in order to say this is a breach of the First Amendment. You're doing an end run around the First Amendment using private entities to do so. Okay, well, that's screwed up. One of the other ways they wanted to do it that got called out was using quasi-governmental agencies. So let's say an agency exists and they would say, we are the Ministry of Truth. That's our job. And we get a certain amount of money from the government, but we're not really part of the government. And we go to companies and we advise them on what's true. And it's like, okay, but you thought, Nina Jankowicz, the one that was supposed to run this Ministry of Truth, that the laptop was Russian disinformation. So the person who was supposed to run the Ministry of Truth was putting out disinformation. What the hell? Now the question becomes, will they ever call any lie that the government put out disinformation? And if the answer is no, then I'm going to say the organization is worthless. It's less than worthless, because at that point, it's just manufacturing a narrative that doesn't necessarily have to be true, that is fully and totally relative to what the government is putting out and saying. At that point, it's not about truth. It's just about the way of government trying to get a hold and corral and control speech without necessarily having their fingerprints directly on it, while also being in control of it. It's outrageous, especially for a country with the First Amendment. And so, yeah, Nina Jankowicz got clowned. People screamed at the top of their lungs that the United States shouldn't have a Ministry of Truth. The government shouldn't be in the business of telling people what truth is, especially considering the amount that the government lies. Like, it's just, yeah, I'm sore on the spot because I lost my job over this nonsense. Like, look, my job was to get it right. That was it. I kept my channel. I literally kept this channel because my thought was, you're going into a company and you're going into, let's say, Sputnik, or let's say RT, or pick any company, let's say China, America, whatever. And you know everything that people say about it, but your relationship with the company hasn't borne that out. Meaning when you come on as a guest or something like that, you get to speak your piece. Nobody pushes you one way or the other. But you don't know as a flat fact until you get into the company. So my thought was, I would always have my channel, in case anything goes wrong. Meaning, if it comes to a situation where someone puts pressure on me to say X or Y, I always have fuck you money to leave. Meaning, I always have my channel. I can go back and do my channel and be poor. I'm okay with that. As opposed to being stuck in a situation where I'm being forced or controlled. It never became an issue because it never really came up. It doesn't work that way. Our job was just what is true. You're giving your take, you're giving your point of view. And the government lies so much that telling the truth is subversive. It's just telling the way it worked. It wasn't, if the government was an honest actor, then, I probably wouldn't have a job. The government is not an honest actor. It lies constantly. And it didn't necessarily like the fact that we were calling out their lies. And we were pointing to unprovoked war. What the hell are you talking about? October 7th. This didn't start on October 7th. They blew up their own pipeline. Get the hell out of here. Joe Biden clearly blew that pipeline up. And when you point that stuff out, which is true, by the way, just, oh, he's a Russian plane. It's fucking outrageous. It's fucking outrageous. I'm sorry. Ellie JJ, where can I join? So I got to be honest. I've never used the membership thing here. I've never used it here. And I don't even know if anybody is going to join it here. I always say you can support through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All of the things help the content. All of it helps the show. At some point, I'm going to get T-shirts, mugs, those type of things. I just haven't sat down and did it yet. I've been so busy with the show. I swear to God, I've been busier over the last several months than I have in God knows how long. But it's weirdly invigorating, oddly enough. It's hard to explain. But I think there's somewhere on YouTube where you can join. I need to nail down a date for join the chess stuff. People have asked about it. And so I'm going to nail that down. And I think it will be fun to be able to beat the hell out of my audience in chess. Sparky, worth reiterating, Israel has deleted, let's call it killed, more Americans than Iran has. Remember the USS Liberty. They murdered those people and they knew they were murdering those people and they knew they were Americans. Sparky, excess US dollar printing was offset by a growth demand for the dollar. Yes, absolutely right. Because if other countries, including developing countries, grew, they required more petrodollars to buy fuel. Not anymore. Oh, Sparky, you're so bright. So think of it this way. All those dollars that are being printed, they don't just stay here in the US. And I know my audience probably knows this, but they don't just stay here. Those dollars are used all over the world, especially when oil was being allocated in dollars. Meaning if you want oil, you had to get it through dollars. The only place you get dollars is from us. So it wasn't a big deal for us to print and print and print because there was always going to be someone out there that wanted the dollar. Okay, that sounds great when the dollar usage around the globe is at 70%. When you have 70% of the globe using the dollar, because again, it's the liquid currency. It's what everybody can use. It's not being manipulated in particular. It's just currency. And then you get the US using sanctions. And then you get it trying to cut off the SWIFT system, meaning cut Russia off from the SWIFT system. Then you get the theft of money from Venezuela. And then you get the theft of $300 billion from Russia. Now, they can say they're holding the money, holding my ass. If you're holding my money, I'm going to consider that theft because you've taken something that belongs to me. So what does the rest of the world think when this dollar that everybody could use, that was very liquid, now doesn't look that way? Now it's a weapon, and it's being used as a strategic weapon, not just in the people that they're going after from the standpoint of sanctions or cutting off industries and those type of things, but also in the context of the amount of dollars that could be made because the U.S. is a reserve currency. So if you have the situation where you can always print out money, okay, well, what can the money do? What can the money buy? If I print out $10 billion, or $10 trillion, what can I buy for $10 trillion? Well, I could buy a war in Afghanistan. I could buy a war in Iraq. Hell, how many missiles, bullets, guns, boats, ships? How many of those things can I buy if I could just create $10 trillion out of thin air? Because I'm the reserve currency. And I know that other countries are going to buy up the debt and everything else. And I know that I could be $50 trillion in debt, but I have a military. And my military means that I'm going to continuously be here so you can trust the dollar. Okay, yeah, that sounds great until you get to 40% and 30%. Meaning, because of the way they decided to use the dollar, many of the countries around the globe decided that is a liability. And the moment I'm on their bad side, they're going to use it against me. It is in our best interest, A, to use our own currency in order to avoid this hegemon being able to use that dollar as a weapon. But B, use our own currency because we don't necessarily like the fact that America create money out of thin air that's backed by purely confidence. It's fascinating. I mean, but it's going to come to a head at some point. Blythe is Scottish, but now works at Brown. He's Scottish, not Irish. He would spit on me if I would have said that. Thank you. Ironically, Trump popularized the term fake news. Yes, he did. But he doesn't seem to realize the overwhelming extent of it. I don't know. I mean, I get the sense that Wilkerson is right, that Trump has to pay off debts. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I would think at this point he would be a little bit more suspect of mainstream media, but who knows? If an Israeli can be a U.S. Presidential administration, why can't a Scottish guy? Well, he can be. He can be. He can be. Especially if he's a dual citizen. He could be. And Blythe is great. I like the guy. Some of his speeches are just fantastic. William 3R, the deep state has a dangerous stranglehold over the United States government. Yes, the big fight is to get them out, i.e. drain the swamp. I don't know if Trump can do it. I suppose we can hope, right? Look, man, I think Trump is the swamp on some level. I mean, on some level, I mean, don't get me wrong, the people that are freaking out on some level get across that he is not like them or he's doing something different. I mean, putting RFK at HHS, for example, has freaked people out royally. Putting in Tulsi Gabbard freaked people out royally. But I would argue that those two picks are necessary, meaning I want them to be freaked out. The idea that we pay twice as much for healthcare than anywhere else around the world. We pay all of this money for medication. We pay all of this money for health. And yet we get worse outcomes. Now, if Health and Human Services is not supposed to be there to make sure that we have good health outcomes, then what the fuck is HHS there for? I guess my point is, I'm fine with them being shaken up. I'm fine with RFK taking somewhat of a proactive role in figuring out why do Americans die 10 years younger. Part of it is, yeah, not having a healthcare system in the United States, but the other part of it is the stuff that we eat, the stuff that we're allowed to eat, the stuff that we give our kids. I mean, at 17 years old, I was diagnosed with kidney failure. And it went back apparently to when I was 12. And your body does something pretty remarkable in that it tries to hide a lot of that stuff from you until it gets to the point where it can't function anymore. And so by the time you get down to like 5 to 10% kidney function, it stops. You're going to die. You can't keep it up. And I think to myself, okay, that was going on when I was 12. And then you think of the cases of childhood diabetes that are in the United States, obesity that's in the United States. And you wonder to yourself, okay, is there something that we're doing that's fundamentally wrong, that's a cultural issue, or for that matter, an economic issue? Meaning the way corporations can ingratiate themselves and capture many of these organizations that are supposed to be studying and maintaining a certain level of integrity of the organization. And if we're going to say that organizations don't need regulation, then, I mean, that kind of breaks every model that we know of in regards to maximization of profit and what companies would do to maximize profit. I mean, do I have to go to Boeing? The Boeing thing is a really good example of that. You have Boeing as an airline wanting to maximize their profit, not being able to compete with Airbus. And so they decide to take a shortcut on the engineering and create these engines that are somewhat unwieldy for the airplane, but then create another shortcut by putting in software to allow a control of it without the pilot being entirely aware of it. And so what happens? The pilot gets in the air, fighting it, and tanks 2 of them. And you get nearly 400 people that die as a result of what comes out that the FAA was not overseeing Boeing and was allowing Boeing to effectively oversee itself. Now, if they're doing that with the airlines, what are they doing with food? Especially when food, health, many times those things are not necessarily revealed until later on in life when you find out, oh, I have cancer, or oh, I have some other kind of disease. Is it possible that what we allow in this country is the reason that our health outcomes are so much worse? I have no issue with RFK being in that position and shaking things up. I'm just saying. As for drain the swamp, I'm not optimistic on that front. I'm not optimistic, especially seeing the people that he put in. I mean, honestly, man, if you tell me I'm going to end wars, and then you put in Hegseth and Rubio, I'm going to think you're out of your mind. I just think. You could say they have a hard-on for Israel, fair enough, but I don't think that hard-on stops at Israel. And, you know, Vance, RFK, and Tulsi, they tend to be less interventionist, at least on the standpoint of Russia. But they're lunatics on the standpoint of Israel. And let's be very clear. On Israel. Iran is not an isolated country anymore. Again, this goes to me saying how incompetent Joe Biden is in regards to his presidency. Iran is not an isolated country. So this idea that you're going to go and do this pressure campaign against Iran and Iran is by itself, that's nonsense. So to me, it becomes, okay, well, what does that mean in real terms? In real world, physical matter reality, what does a pressure campaign mean? I have no idea. I have no idea. But I got to be honest, it terrifies me, because the reality of it is Iran is not by itself, nor does Iran seem like it's willing to take any shit off of Trump in this iteration, especially since he's the one that murdered Soleimani. We will see, though. We will see. Look, whether it's Trump in this situation or Biden in pretty much every situation, I feel like we're still in the same box, frankly. I feel like we're in the same box. Thanks for what you do, Jamal. Putting all those warmongers in power doesn't look good. No, it does not. As far as Ukraine war, no way Russia backs down, especially since NATO expanded. Agreed. Random guy. Look, the entire point of this really had to do with NATO expansion. NATO, they agreed when the Soviet Union failed that NATO wasn't going to be expanding 1 inch to the east. They didn't just expand 1 inch to the east, they expanded to the borders of Russia. To make it even worse, then they knocked over the Ukrainian government, put in a patsy government. And like anywhere else, if Donald Trump overthrew the US government back on January 6th, and California and Washington State says, we're out, we're not playing this game. He didn't win. We chose a different candidate, and the democratically elected candidate is not the one that's in power. So we are no longer part of this republic. Since it's no longer a republic, this is something else. Trumptopia or whatever. And then Trump turns around and starts bombing California and Washington, killing the people in that state. That would be something that's similar that happened in regards to Ukraine. The moment that the government collapsed, the democratically elected government that was elected by ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the east and Ukrainians in the west, when that government collapsed, the Ukrainians in the east says, we're done. Like 90%, I think it was like 99% of the people in Crimea decided to leave, voted to leave. And then you had the referendums in the other locations. I guess my point is this. Overthrowing the government is so provocative. And to turn around and say, well, we don't have anything to do with it, this is totally unprovoked. Nonsense. Utter nonsense. All of these people are getting killed purely for geopolitical expansionary reasons. That's why I look at this war and find it to be an utter and complete catastrophe. And in the same way we're funding this proxy war against Russia, we're funding another proxy war in the Middle East with Israel. We are getting hundreds of thousands of people killed in these wars. And from my point of view, the shit needs to stop. How do you spend $10 trillion in Afghanistan and in Iraq? And the moment that somebody says, hey, can we get health care? We can't afford that. What about expansion of Social Security? We can't afford that either. Hey, what about a child tax credit? So every child gets $300 growing up, meaning every parent gets $300 in order to support their kid, almost like Social Security for kids. Can't afford that either. So we have to, kill that. But we can spend $10 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq. We're not even in Afghanistan right now, and Iraq wants us out. And yet, when it comes up to us having these main concerns about economic populism, oh, that's off the table. How is that not enraging? How is that not enraging? Like, that is fucking outrageous for somebody to look you in the face and make that argument. Yeah, we spent $10 trillion in this situation with $35 trillion in debt. And then you look around and say, okay, what do you have to show for it? And then you look at some of the stuff that's in China where they did not spend $10 trillion in wars. And you buildings, high rises, all of this new technology, all of this stuff going all throughout China. We wasted trillions. And then you get a bunch of lunatics who seem perfectly willing to do it again, wasting our coffers and wasting our money. Something needs to change. And if the American public is looking at the direction of the country, say it's going in the wrong way, well, it's not their fault. They just so happen to be right. They just didn't necessarily have any option to give them in a better way. In fact of the matter is the orthodoxy of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are somewhat different than Trump's way that he thinks about foreign policy, because at the very least, he is willing to make a deal in a way that none of these other goofballs are. And just the willingness, something that should just be a natural human trait, that willingness to make a deal is a positive in comparison to the other lunatics that just so happen to be in office. My fear and concern is that Donald Trump is not anti-war. That was never the argument. He was just had a willingness to make a deal in a way that others didn't. I guess my point is, I don't know what this looks like in Ukraine, because Donald Trump could very well not accept what Putin is going to say. Putin is going to say, you must accept the realities on the ground. Full stop. These are Russian territory, part of the Russian Federation. There's no negotiation on this. Crimea is Russian. There's no negotiation on that. Ukraine will not ever become part of NATO. They will remain neutral, which again, I don't see what the big deal about Ukraine being neutral is, but from the US point of view, there are no such thing as neutral actors. You're either with us or against us. And if Ukraine is neutral, by definition, it's against us. Ergo, they may even have qualms with that. But again, the entire point of that test of strength was to keep Ukraine out of NATO. If Ukraine would have won the war, Ukraine could have done whatever it wanted. Russia would have lost the capability of saying no, because the no was being said through military action. That's not what happened. Europe was deindustrialized. Right now, Europe is a suffering garden, as they call it, considering the amount of money that they're now paying for oil, gas, and those type of things. I guess my point is, none of that stuff worked. And we spent $200 billion for what? Like, what do we get out of this? I know they're arguing, well, we sold a lot of weapons, and we sold a lot of bullets and guns, and we sold a lot of that stuff back to ourselves. Okay, yeah, but you got like 500,000-600,000 people killed. Why doesn't that matter? And yet, when they're talking about it, they're acting as if we're fighting for Ukraine. Okay, yeah, but you got 500,000-600,000 Ukrainians killed, and you lost territory on top of that. And it's not a situation where you have the capability of stopping the Russians right now. So what was the point? Like, it is very frustrating. I put it that way. I don't see the swamp being drained. No. I would think it would take different people to drain the swamp. And it sounds like Donald Trump just put in a bunch of different swamp monsters with different objectives than the Biden administration. I could be wrong. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I run from Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And I know it's beyond 10 a.m., but I always read the chats at the very end. Look, guys, if you dig it, definitely hit the like button. It helps with the show. And if you really dig it, definitely subscribe. I will be here early Monday morning or early Tuesday morning. I'll be back here tomorrow morning. Definitely hit the notification bell. I pop in at all times, in all hours. I'm an insomniac. And if you really dig it, you can always support through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, chats. I read them at every show. So I'm going to say thank all of you. I appreciate you guys joining me. We had a damn good show today. And I will see you guys bright and early Tuesday morning. I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking about the day. I knew what day it was. I was thinking on whether or not I was going to do a video after this. That's where I'll post. You all have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Show, signing off. Have a good day, all.